Lepo pozdravljeni na dogodku Centra za kreativnost, kjerkoli že ste, na streamu, z nami v živo v publiki. Pozdravljamo vas na naslednjem prenosu veščin. Tokrat se bomo pogovarjali o nizkoogljičnih stavbah in o tem, kako graditi bolje, bolj trajnostno in s tem zmanjšati v bistvu vpliv, ki ga ima gradbeni sektor na samo okolje. Tokratni dogodek organiziramo v sodelovanju s centrom CER, to je partnerstvo za trajnostno gospodarstvo in Climate Kitsom. Zato na oder vabim najprej Ano Struna-Bregar, ki je izvršna direktorica CER-a, da nam pove nekaj uvodnih besed o današnjem dogodku.
Mika, najlepša hvala za povabilo in seveda tudi sodelovanje. Spoštovani udeleženci in partnerji današnjega posveta, veseli nas, da smo združili sinergije, trije različni partnerji na področjih, ki bodo v prihodnosti deležna korenitih sprememb. Partnerji prihajamo iz kreativnega sektorja, gospodarskega in inovacijskega področja. Izhodišče za današnji dogodek izhaja iz globalnih izzivov, trendov in potreb, kako zagotoviti bolj vzdržno prihodnost in oblikovanje podnebno nevtralne družbe. Evropska unija se je zavezala, da bo do leta 2050 postala prva podnebno nevtralna celina. K zmanjševanju emisij pa se je jasno zavezala tudi Slovenija. Zato bo ključno razogljičiti tudi gradbeni sektor, ki predstavlja skoraj 40% vseh emisij ogljika. Število držav in mest, podjetij in organizacij, ki se zavezujejo, da bodo do sredine stoletja dosegle ogljično nevtralnost, vztrajno narašča. S tem pa narašča tudi pozornost do ogljično nevtralnih stavb. Priča smo sprememba v standardih, regulativi in vse bolj ozaveščenih naročnikih. Na današnjem dogodku bomo z mednarodnimi in domačimi strokovnjaki iskali odgovore na vprašanja. Ali je ogljično nevtralna gradnja mit ali realnost? Kakšne inovacije bodo potrebne, da bomo ustvarili trajnostno grajeno okolje, ki bo dajalo prednost razogljičenju, krožnemu gospodarstvu, predvsem pa da bo zagotavljalo dobro počutje vseh nas v prostorih, kjer živimo, se učimo, delamo in tudi igramo. Skušali bomo govoriti tudi na vprašanja, kateri deležniki morajo sodelovati, da bi dosegli nizkoogljično gradnjo, kako jo pospešiti in kateri so dobri primeri iz prakse. Nenazadnje pa z današnjim dogodkom naslavljamo temo, kako povezati svetove znanosti, tehnologije, gospodarstva, umetnosti in kulture. Današnji dogodek je organiziran v sklopu Evropskih dnevov EIT Climate Kick, zato bomo za uvod pogledali kratek predstavitveni film.
EIT Climate Kick je podnebna inovacijska iniciativa Evropske unije, usmerjena v pospeševanje prehoda v brezogljično in odporno družbo preko sistemske preobrazbe. Regionalna inovacijska shema je nosilna iniciativa EIT Climate Kick, ki deluje na območju južne, vzhodne in srednje Evrope, kamor spada tudi Slovenija. Shema je zasnovana kot dolgoročna iniciativa krepitve nacionalnih in regionalnih inovacijskih ekosistemov v državah, ki se na lestvici EU Innovation Scoreboard uvrščajo v spodnji del lestvice. Širše poslanstvo je prispevati v napredku pri preprečevanju in prilagajanju na podnebne spremembe s krepitvijo inovativnosti držav preko različnih programov.
Misija Evropske unije naše družbe v naslednjem desetletju je visoko leteča, a nujna. To je prehod podnebno nevtralen, okolju in ljudem prijazen razvoj. Misija je, da spremenimo skoraj vse. Naše navade, poslovne modele, energetske sisteme, modele financiranja, upravljanja. Za vse to imamo že ogromno znanja in rešitev, ki pa jih prepočasi in s težavo spravljamo v promet. Sem Nina in sem del mreže slovenskega EIT Climate Kick Huba, kjer želimo z inovativnimi rešitvami te ovire nasloviti, da misijo tudi uresničimo.
EIT Climate Kick je v evropskih državah prisoten preko nacionalnih predstavništev ali hubov, ki podpirajo izvajanje strategije Climate Kick na terenu in vzpostavljajo partnerstva za prehod v brezogljično družbo. Z januarjem 2021 je koordinacijo slovenskega huba prevzel e-zavod, poleg njega pa so člani huba še Kemijski inštitut, Center odličnosti nizkoogljične tehnologije KONOT in Center energetsko učinkovitih rešitev CER. Vizija huba je postati živi laboratorij za aktivnosti preprečevanja in blaženja podnebnih sprememb z vključevanjem celotnega 4-nivojskega partnerstva v verigo vrednosti, ki se je sposobna soočati z največjimi izzivi z področja podnebnih sprememb.
V zavodu kot koordinatorji nacionalnega Climate Kick huba pospešujemo procese prehoda Slovenije v brezogljično družbo. V ta namen podpiramo različne organizacije, od lokalnih skupnosti, univerz, podjetij, s katerimi bomo naslovili te izzive.
Hub je lahko partner za sistemsko inoviranje raznovrstnim organizacijam in sistemom. Nudimo podporo pri načrtovanju želenih sprememb na področjih mobilizacije skupnosti in vključevanje prebivalcev, vzpostavljanja inovacijskih partnerstev, razvoja portfeljev in trajnostnih poslovnih modelov, razvoja in vodenja projektov ter vodenja strukturnih procesov preobrazbe sistemov.
Sem Ana Struna-Bregar iz CER prvega partnerstva za trajnostno gospodarstvo v Sloveniji. V Climate Kick Hub sodelujemo, ker nam lahko le skupnimi sinergijami uspe modernizacija družbe tako, da bomo dosegli podnebno nevtralnost.
Slovenija s svojimi izzivi in potenciali usmerja naše delovanje v področja trajnostne in brezogljične gradnje, vzpostavljanje procesov krožnega gospodarstva na vseh nivojih in ohranjanje biodiverzitete tudi preko uvajanja sonaravnih rešitev, infrastrukturne projekte, kmetijstvo in prostorsko načrtovanje. Te teme bodo v prihodnjem obdobju tudi rdeča nit slovenskega Climate Kick huba, ki so v letu 2021 tudi nosilne teme junijskih posvetov v okviru dnevov Climate Kick v Sloveniji. Vabimo zainteresirane okoljske inovatorje in organizacije, ki želijo prispevati k tranziciji v brezogljično prihodnost, da se pridružijo našemu partnerstvu, bodisi kot udeleženci dogodkov in izobraževanj, projektni partnerji ali razvojni partnerji. Naše aktivnosti lahko spremljate preko naše spletne strani, kjer najdete tudi naše kontakte.
V Climate Kick hubu sodelujemo zaradi pridobivanja novih poznanstev in zaradi inovativnih projektov s področji brezogljične tehnologije, krožnega gospodarstva in trajnostne rabe zemlje.
V sklopu dnevov Climate Kicka bodo v tem tednu organiziranih še več dogodkov, tako da vabljeni, da si jih ogledate na spletni strani. Naša prva predstavitev pa bo primer dobre prakse iz tujine. Arhitekt Peter Andreas Satrup, ki prihaja iz Danske zveze arhitekturnih podjetij, je član tudi upravnega odbora Danske zveze za trajnostno gradnjo in je sodeloval pri pripravi evropskih kriterijev za trajnostno gradnjo. Nam bo predstavil primere, kako se danski arhitekti lotevajo načrtovanja in usmeritev za nizkoogljično gradnjo. Danska je nedavno v gradbeni kodeks uvedla cilje vrednosti za nizkimi emisijami ogljika, ki bodo obvezne od leta 2023 na podlagi raziskave o stanju sodobnih arhitekturnih projektov. Peter Andreas Satrup bo predstavil nedavne danske izkušnje za nizkoogljično arhitekturo in kako lahko arhitekti in gradbeni sektor prispevajo k nizkoogljični industriji v prihodnji podnebno nevtralni Evropi. Peter, Andreas, hi. I hope you are with us.
Definitely. Thank you, Anna.
Okay,
I hope
hi.
you said some nice words.
The floor is yours. In prezentacija bo v angleščini. Kindly welcome to be with us.
Thank you so much. And while I try to share my screen, you could please tell me if this is looking right to you, because
Just a
I'm
second.
not necessarily seeing the same thing that you do.
Se vidi screen?
Full screen and yes.
There we go. All right.
Okay.
And a little bit back. Okay, thank you so much for the invitation, and I wish I could be with you all in the garden. It looks like a lovely place you have there. I'm from the Danish Association of Architectural Firms, and I'd love to give you share some ideas and some experiences that we have about how low can you go, and that's a little bit of a pun, you know. The point is, I think architects and the creative businesses have a huge potential in actually creating low carbon architecture and making the green transition. And I'll be going to show some examples. Also, I would like to pinpoint that it's really a question of reducing the climate footprint. Of course, the aim is climate neutrality, but to get to neutral, you have to look at the energy supply. And the business for architects is really to bring the impacts down associated with the construction technology we use and the use of the building. So first, I'd like to give you an invitation. We are hosting the Architects World Congress in 2023. That's very soon, and we'll hope to see you in Copenhagen once we can travel freely again, and we'll be discussing the progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. So I'd love to see some Slovenian projects in Copenhagen. I suppose you're also familiar with the Green Deal. That's what I'm going to start to talk about, and then I'll take a little detour because I think that when we discuss climate, then we're really discussing the cost side of the value of architecture. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And I'm going to talk about what the Danish targets are now that we have a really quite ambitious plan for having 70% carbon reductions by 2030. So that's it. This is, of course, this has a huge this has a huge attention in the EU Commission and the EU General, and I'm quite lucky to live in a country where actually the last election was won on the topic of climate. So definitely the population wishes to go forward and have an advanced take on this. This is going to be introduced into law or it has been introduced in law in Denmark, that we're going to reduce climate footprint of buildings in the building regulations, but it is rapidly going into EU law as well. So it will come to everybody in a very few years. What I think is significant is now that there's several initiatives. There's the EU Renovation Wave. There's the EU Taxonomy for Sustainable Finance. There's the levels framework for how to evaluate how sustainable a building is, and all these initiatives will work, in compound and will really create a strong effort. So we better prepare for ourselves. A little bit about levels because we tested that. I think it's a very good system, and I hope it will be a common denominator for all the different certification systems that we see. Some countries use the DGNB, others use the BREEAM, some use the LEED, and so on. But these will be sort of core sustainability metrics that we hope that all the certification systems and the national legislative initiatives, the building codes, will integrate in the near future. And that'll be greenhouse gas emissions, resource efficiency, water use, indoor environment, future-proofing the indoor environment as the climate warms, and some measurement of the resilience of the building. And then we of course need to discuss also how does this create value, not only to the investors but to the users of the society. So I think it's a really good framework, and it will hopefully bridge the not so ambitious building regulations to the certification system, so that we'll sort of move the mass of construction efforts into a more sustainable direction. So that's what I hope to see in the near future. But we really need to see this as part of the integrated value of architecture. And we've been very occupied with this question of how does architecture create value, because It can lead to all sort of, if you can't explain, as an architect, how you create value for your customers, but also for the society, you can have misunderstandings like you see in this advertisement from a real estate agent that asks, when the architect wants grass on the roof, who has the kind of Bisol hat on, implying that the architect is not interested in cost, is only interested in wacky shapes and useless ecological things like grass on the roof, which is of course a complete misunderstanding of what an architect does. So in order to change that conception of architects and really show, what is it that we do, we created this collection of case studies, which we really wanted to base on evidence and other sources than the architects, explaining themselves what the concept is about. So we have a lot of data and statistics and so on underpinning these. And it's really important to emphasize that this is about value in a broad sense. It's triple bottom line based. It's social, it's economic, it's environmental values. And of course, when you speak of value, it's a question of what are the benefits you get and what are the price. And of course, if we're talking about climate footprint, the price is to the environment. And that will hit us in the back in a few years once we see accelerated effects of climate change. And then it will come economic questions and definitely also social questions. So we need to see things in connection and in cohesion and the interrelationship. So just to say that a little bit about the power of architecture, it doesn't cost anything or next to nothing to develop a brief, an idea for a project. It does not cost very much to design a project. It does cost quite a lot to build a project, and we are totally focused on the construction economy. That's a given. You need to meet, the demands of price and time, when you build something. So of course, everybody in the construction industry is obsessed with the cost of construction. But, as far as we don't calculate, the cost of operation for the next 50 years, and that doesn't influence the very short-term business models that a lot of construction have, really, we miss out and we leave some opportunities, and we leave sort of big bill of maintenance and operation, for coming generations. But what nobody really measures is what impact does the building really has on the user? What are the benefits? So if you look at the last bubble in the figure, that's the benefits and the cost that may be reduced by the design. What if you had a building that actually improved the well-being and the health of its occupants, reduced sick days? If this was an office building or hospital even, that range of economy would be so much greater than the cost of the design solution, which is next to nothing, right? So can design accelerate the benefits and reduce the cost? Yes, it can, and I'll be showing some of the projects. And here we have a triple bottom line project, which is designed by Vandkunsten Architects. It's a social housing development outside Copenhagen. So it's built on a very tight budget. Social housing is subsidized, so costs are really, really closely monitored. And they were actually trying out prefab construction techniques, and they were able to reduce the costs of construction by 20%, which would then directly benefit the tenants, and they would have a lower rent. So that's of course great, but they also monitored it at every stage of the design. They monitored, well, what is the impact of the energy efficiency on the greenhouse gas emissions? What is the impact of the use of materials on greenhouse gas emissions? So the climate footprint was continually tracked, and they were able to reduce that by 70%. By design alone. So a very significant contribution at a reduced cost. So we can definitely say this is not about sustainable solutions being particularly expensive. On the contrary, if you really use your imagination and you use the knowledge and the competence of an architect who knows how to document the value creation, well, you can get both. more sustainable and cheaper. And this, I mean, they even got back to the tenants and asked them, how are you thriving? How's the well-being? How's your trust in your neighbors? And a lot of other important things for the housing associations. And they found that people were really satisfied with living there, and they had almost no vacancies. People, once they moved out, they didn't want to move in. Once they moved in, they didn't want to move out. So success stories on all true bottom lines. We shouldn't forget, of course, that a lot about the climate talk or the climate challenges will be also about accommodating the effects of increasing temperatures. And in Denmark, what we are looking into is storm weather surges and flash floods from high rains. We live in a rather flat country, so the rain can actually flood large urban areas. And the point here is that landscape solutions, I mean, landscape architectural solutions are very much cheaper than building sewers. You can have sort of integrated surface sewage systems that can handle the water, and you can do water retention with plants and so on. And this costs less than 25% of what it actually costs to upgrade the entire sewer systems. So the real trick to this is that once you begin to think in terms of landscaping solutions, architectural solutions, you can actually use an infrastructural problem like rising seawater, as you see in big projects for Manhattan, or the flooding project that I just showed you. You can actually use these to create social spaces, social urban spaces, and that can actually have great benefits for the urban life once there's not an emergency situation, and that can actually drive a lot of other benefits. So, how do you actually go about documenting the value? I think it's very important to note that the key is really in the stakeholder dialogue. How do you create shared value? Well, you have to ask people. You have to, of course, work for the investor, but you also have to have the users in mind, and you have to go back to the users and ask them actually, how do you live in this? How do you use this? And what is of benefit to you? And you also need to address the wider community. So there are social methods, there are environmental methods that you can use to assess, that you can use to document value. And of course, what we're looking into is not just construction cost. We want to move it from construction cost to life cycle costing. And we really want to see the economic upside as well and document that. In this book, Architecture Creates Value, you can find all kinds of methods to document social value and have some cases on how that was done. And you can also document economic value and see how this, which is sort of part climate mitigation, part urban life quality scheme, can also really be a good business model for the municipality in which it's built. This park is actually built, it paid back in only 1.5 years, considering the cost of construction and the benefits that the municipality receives. Again, we should focus on materials. I think once we're sort of become very good at energy efficiency, we should really focus on materials. If you work with circular economy construction principles, you can save 40 to 60% of climate impacts compared to using new virgin materials, as this project by Linear, 3XN, and Vandkunsten demonstrates. And that is actually possible for almost all building components in a social housing project such as this. Again, it doesn't have to come with an additional cost. So the potentials are huge, and we're really looking into making it easy for architects to document these values and these contributions that they do with their designs, and do a further enhancing the cases that we can share with people like you and within our members, because this is also about building understanding, building competences, and showing that this is actually the power that an architect has. So we think this is very important to communicate. What are the contributions that you can do as an architect? What is it that we can do for not only our clients, but for our societies, and for the communities that we work in? And I think that we can, once we get the stakeholder dialogue going, and we can begin to talk about ambitions and what we want to achieve with the climate, for instance, or with the biodiversity and other sustainability indicators, we can really move these agenda. From the political level, we've been asking the government or subsequent Danish governments to actually legislate and create some binding climate targets that are going to be integrated in the building code. Because the problem is that these projects that you see here that I show you, they are, of course, front-runner projects. They are some of the most ambitious projects that we know, and they're some of the most clever architects that we have in Denmark. So, of course, it's not the mass of projects that are not necessarily very ambitious and just do as usual. I suppose you know that situation from Slovenia as well. And of course, the construction sector is a huge problem in terms of the use of energy, in terms of resources, in terms of creating waste and so on. So this is an agenda where taking the right decision really matters. And that's why architects have a role to play. Of course, architects don't do it alone. We need to work with contractors, with engineers, with clients, with everybody in the construction value chain in order to do these things. So what we are proposing the government would be a roadmap for 70% carbon reductions by 2030. And as you see in the slide here, the sort of the tools to get there is energy efficiency retrofits. That's the most important and most beneficial and cheapest thing to do by far. Then, of course, we need to integrate renewable energy systems, but that is not much of an architectural issue unless you do it with really ugly photovoltaic takes on the roof or the facade. But instead of doing something beautiful and something that creates value. And then, of course, we want to have an ambitious roadmap for how to reduce greenhouse gases in the building code, so that everybody, the entire industry, knows these are the demands, and we're going to meet them in steps every 3 to 5 years, until 2030. And then, of course, we also need to work on energy labeling, because that is a bit of a difficult thing to do on existing houses, and we think that would make existing building owners much more aware of the opportunities in energy retrofit. So that will point back to the first initiative. We've had quite a lot of success with reducing energy use in new buildings over the last years. The 70s oil crisis was a huge shock to Denmark. We were totally dependent. No oil had been found in the North Sea by then. And all of a sudden, there was nothing to feed the industry and nothing to heat our homes, which is a very that's a bad situation in a cold country like ours. So successive governments have actually been legislating energy efficiency for decades, and we have had no real trouble meeting the European near zero energy building standards ahead of time. So that's been good. And why not do the same thing with carbon emissions? Let's do that. So in order to facilitate that discussion, the Aalborg University did a case study of 60 different buildings, and they are different typologies. Some are offices and some are housing, but they are nevertheless somewhat comparable. The whole idea of this study was to find out what is actually the range of carbon emissions from different construction types, and where can we actually put the threshold and the target values that we want to aim at for the next case. As you see in the figure, there's quite a lot of there's quite a span. The most inefficient building is 14.5 kilogram carbon equivalents per square meter per year, and the most efficient one is almost half that at 6.5. I think these numbers, you just need to take into account that the way you do these calculations will depend very much on the way you do life cycle assessments, and that varies a bit from country to country, since we have different data and different ways of doing the details. But in the Danish occasion, you see that there's sort of a 200% variation from the worst to from the best to the worst. But there's also a mid-range, just around 8.5, which almost sort of the big mass of construction is around. So I think as an architect, I think we should aim to improve something like that and take out the worst at the beginning. So our recommendations would actually be to put a threshold value high enough so everybody would be able to build, according to the building code in 2 years, in 2023, and then reduce the threshold values quite a lot until 2030. And we actually succeed in making that argument with the government. They bought into it, and they believed us when we said that this would be possible, even though we know that this will be a real tough challenge, not only for the architects, but also for the entire construction industry. So these are the threshold values. We start with 12. So most of the buildings in the analysis could comply within the next 2 years. And then there will be a voluntary climate emissions or climate efficient class where you have more ambitious targets, and we're going to reduce the initial targets and make that half the level in 2030. I must say that a lot of the construction sector think that this is very challenging, particularly the building component manufacturers. But if you ask my members, I mean, the architects, the best or the most, the ones that have been studying this the most, they think that this is absolutely not ambitious enough. It's not nearly ambitious enough. Not particularly not if you think of the pending climate crisis and the time consideration that we only have a decade, maybe 15 years, 20 years that the scientists say that we have in order to reduce our emissions a lot. So I'm going to delve into that using Vandkunsten, which you also saw in some of the previous slides. They have 4 case studies here. Danmarksrund, the one you saw initially, where you had reduced the climate impacts. You have that's a hybrid construction with parts partially wooden. Then you have Lisbjerg, which is a solid mass timber construction, and you have Havnevin, which is a concrete element low-rise building with reused cladding, reused brick cladding. And Gellerup, the last big concrete slab there, is a retrofit project for social housing project of the 60s. So that's just to keep in mind that the construction technologies are quite different. And if you compare them, you see that these are the life cycle emissions for a period of 15 years. And as you see on the graph, there's a lot of carbon embedded in the construction process. That's why it rises steeply in the beginning, and then the rest of it is retrofits and energy use in operation that results in these emissions. And as you see, the concrete construction row houses, Havnevin, it is double the emissions as the other ones, which were in wood, and the retrofit as well. And this is, if you compare that to the previous slide of the 60 case studies, all of these are doing. They are at the best half of the 60 60 cases. So we're really looking into an optimization potential that is quite beyond what you saw in the previous or the overall case study of 60 cases. One point that I would like to make, that the three of them is new builds, different construction technologies. So you see that if you look at these cases, and then you would actually see that for ordinary construction technologies, such as concrete elements and bricks, which is built a lot in Denmark, the embodied carbon emissions associated with the material selection, that is more than 3/4, 75%. So the optimization potential is in the materials. And that's also what the other cases in wooden construction or hybrid construction shows, that they have a much reduced embodied carbon impact. And I'd also like to know to make sure that as you see, the retrofit is at the bottom level as well, comparable to mass timber. And actually, the local government, they argued that, well, we want to demolish this. This is a problematic social housing project. We want to demolish it and build a new one. But if that was the decision you took, instead of retrofitting it as Vandkunsten did, it would have cost you 3 times as much carbon emissions. There's really a strong measure that you should focus on retrofitting as much as possible. And if not retrofitting, you should use circular economy principles, reusing materials, because that will save you a lot of carbon emissions too. Looking a little bit closer at the best case, the mass timber project. Well, I mean, Vandkunsten don't think that we're finished. This project, which is built in Aarhus, the second largest city in Denmark, has a climate footprint of 5 kilogram carbon equivalents per square meter per year. So it's in the very best range of the it's below actually the best of the it's among the very best of the 60 case studies, as you see on the slide. But if you see on the slide what we can do with it, if we actually continue to improve the optimization of materials, then to the left or to the right of the image, you see the 3 orange columns. That is concrete. That's the terrain deck. That of course serves out as a foundation for the rest of the building. You can actually cut a third of the emissions from that deck if you optimize the construction. The concrete that is in the stairwells and the bathrooms can be further optimized. You could save more than half of the concrete there. And the insulation, if you change from mineral wool to wood fiber insulation or paper fiber or something like that, you can also take out a lot of the emissions there. Something like plasterboard, the right hand column, can also be halved. And you see the big negative one, that is the wooden construction, because that's actually a sort of if you can leave that in place, that gives you a negative climate impact. So, considering these things, you can actually save a further 50% even from the best building, and drive the best performing building down to 2.5 kilogram carbon equivalents per year. So just to sum up, we have, and at least in the Danish context, seen that the average construction types or typical construction types lie in this range from 6.5 to 14.5. You can reduce that by half if you use reuse materials, and if you prepare the building for reuse, so that's by design principles. If you retrofit instead of demolishing and building new, you will save 75%, of course, dependent on how much you retrofit and how much you keep. And what is most important is that all these factors, they are totally dependent on architectural design and the client's decision-making based on the architect's advice. So I'll definitely say that if you're an architect or another creative person in the construction sector, you do have a lot of power and a lot to contribute with to drive down our carbon emissions. So everything that you do can actually contribute to saving maybe 2/3, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less, depending on what you do. And you can do that today. So I think that we should definitely consider that what we need to do here is to educate ourselves, to integrate the information technologies. This is based on life cycle assessments. You can actually link that to the digital models that you use to sort of design the building, and then you can calculate your climate footprint in relatively short time. So it doesn't have to cost a lot, but you have to know the right way about it. And we need to do that together with engineers and maybe people who are very good at programming, because once we have the digital solutions for this, it will become much easier to find the right solutions. So I think that will be the last word. I hope that we can discuss this to a further degree in Copenhagen very soon. And yeah, thanks for inviting me, Anna.
Peter, thank you. Thank you for this extensive presentation and overview of state of the art in Denmark. And maybe just one question before you leave us. Denmark is actually among one of the most ambitious countries setting climate targets. I think the target is to reduce carbon emission for 70% until 2030 regarding 1990. And also Copenhagen set the target to become among first carbon neutral cities. I think the target is for 2025, so in next 4 years. Do you think you will achieve all these targets, or this is a myth?
I hope so. I hope so for the sake of all the younger generations, and I think that Copenhagen is doing well, but they're also realizing that this is a very tough job, and some of the solutions that you thought was very good, for instance, incinerating waste. We have the Bjarke Ingels waste plant with a skiing slope on top. I think the skiing slope is really the lasting legacy, because the waste incineration will turn out to be not so sustainable after all, as we run out of waste because people become better at recycling waste. So we have to adjust a bit, but that should definitely not keep us from committing everything we have to support these ambitions. I think also that it's an ambitious target, the 70%, but it is what is necessary. I mean, all countries should be having a target like that by 2030, I believe. And maybe some countries will have an easier job. I mean, after all, we spend a lot of energy on heating our homes.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. It's actually the job of our generation, and I hope we will win this game for all of us. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.
See you. Nadaljujemo z našo naslednjo predstavitvijo. Predstavitev bo imela profesor dr. Andreja Kutnar, direktorica InnoRenew in profesorica za področje lesarstva na Univerzi na Primorskem. InnoRenew je center odličnosti, je neodvisni raziskovalni inštitut, ki je bil ustanovljen leta 2017. Ukvarjajo se z raziskovanjem obnovljivih virov, trajnostne gradnje ter vpeljavo znanstvenih dognanj v industrijo. Poseben poudarek pa dajejo lesu. Imajo bogato ekipo mednarodnih strokovnjakov in znanstvenikov in s svojimi rešitvami vidijo rešitve na podnebno krizo tako na področju stavb kot materialov. Andreja, lepo vabljena.
Pozdravljeni, najlepša hvala Ana za predstavitev. Tako da po predstavitvi predhodni imam kar težko nalogo prikazati neko inovativnost, glede na to, da sem naslovila moje predavanje vrednotenje okoljskih vplivov stavb, primeri in priložnosti za inoviranje. Morda samo trenutek, da si uspem prezentacijo, v bistvu dati na pozitiv, neki nagaja, neko geslo bi želeli imeti, tako da če lahko nekdo pomaga, tako da bo bolj teklo. Sicer pa lahko pričnem, da stavbe, ogljični vtis, vrednotenje okoljskih vplivov je nekaj, kar že dalj časa govorimo. In po eni strani moramo razmišljati o materialih, ki jih uporabimo v grajenem okolju, po drugi strani pa morda se nismo do sedaj toliko osredotočili na odpadke, na ostanke, ki nastajajo v času gradnje, kot tudi, kaj se bo zgodilo po tistem, ko stavba več ne bo v uporabi. Najlepša hvala, sedaj pa naj bi prezentacija delovala. Zdaj v številkah lahko kar takoj vidimo, da je ogromno priložnosti v odpadkih, ki nastanejo v gradbenem sektorju. In sicer je v Evropi nekje 18 milijonov delovnih mest, ki jih zagotavlja gradbeni sektor. Glede na to, kot je bilo poudarjeno, da mi bolj se osredotočimo ali pa velik poudarek dajemo lesarstvu, bi želela izpostaviti, da letno v Evropi nastane 7 milijonov odpadnega lesa in trenutno zgolj 33% tega odpadnega lesa koristno uporabimo. Spravi, gre za ogromne količine, ki jih imamo na voljo, ki jih lahko koristno uporabimo za inovativne proizvode. In zakaj to poudarjamo? To poudarjamo zato, ker je les obnovljivi material in s katerim lahko dejansko dosežemo krožnost. Pravi, krožna ekonomija, krožno gospodarstvo, vsi se o njej pogovarjamo, vendar včasih pozabimo, da gre za zelo signifikantno razliko med obnovljivimi materiali in neobnovljivimi materiali. Pri lesu dosežemo zaprti krog. Gremo od gozda do hiše, do mize, na koncu do izrabe v kemijski industriji, v farmaciji in na koncu seveda gre ponovno zadeva v hranilo za naslednji gozd, za naslednje drevo. Pri neobnovljivih materialih prav tako uspešno znamo dosegati zaprte kroge, vendar začetek je tisti, katerega ne moremo skleniti z zaključkom. Pravi, vedno zemlji odvzamemo nekaj in ne moremo povrniti. Pri lesu pa taka krožnost ima še dodatno prednost, in sicer tako imenovano omogočanje kaskadne izrabe, kar pomeni, da gremo iz drevesa do hloda, nato do deske, do konstrukcijskih elementov, nato do kompozitov, ki se uporabljajo v najrazličnejše namene, kot tudi na koncu do kemikalij in seveda tudi energije. Da bomo pa lahko koristno izrabili odslužen les ali pa lesne odpadke, pa je izredno pomembno, da se osredotočimo tudi na nove poslovne modele in pa seveda tudi na nekaj, kar navadno ne uporabljamo, in to je tako imenovana povratna logistika. S preprostimi besedami bi lahko rekla, da kako zdaj z vseh stavb, ki jih imamo v Sloveniji, pridobiti odslužen les na koncu življenjskega cikla in ga pripeljati nazaj v proizvodnjo. Pri tem seveda je potrebno se zavedati, da tako zbiranje kot sortiranje, shranjevanje odsluženega lesa izredno vpliva na to, zakaj ga lahko nadalje uporabimo. Tu na sliki imam prikazana dva primera. En primer je odsluženo pohištvo, ki se ga uporablja za energijo, gre za primer iz Izole. Drug primer tudi iz naše Primorske je v Kopru, kjer imamo popolnoma čiste lesne ostanke, ki se izrabljajo v energetske namene in dejansko zamujamo priložnosti. Ja. No, sedaj bom pa jaz tukaj poklikala, ko sem prišla na prezentacijo, na slajd, pri katerem sem bila, takole, evo, sedaj pa mislim, da bo šlo lažje, se opravičujem, upam, da vas ni preveč zmotilo. Kljub samo, če nadaljujemo, se pravi, ponovna uporaba je ključna za doseganje trajnosti, po mojem mnenju. Seveda je tu izredno pomembno, da razmišljamo, predvsem sem vesela, da smo danes tukaj, ker je tudi nekako središče kreativnega sektorja, ker verjamem, da brez kreativnega sektorja nam ne bo uspelo inovirati na področju ponovne uporabe materialov. Seveda pa je pomembno, kaj vgradimo v stavbo, ko govorimo o trajnosti, in zdaj eno preglednico imam tu na prosojnici, in sicer primerjava ogljičnega odtisa in zaloga biogenega ogljika v različnih materialih. Vem, da je preglednica s preveč podatki in jo je težko slediti, a kljub vsemu, kaj bi želela poudariti, če uporabimo les, če uporabimo žagan les iglavcev, je naš ogljični odtis negativen in to kar preko 2000 ton CO2-ja. Medtem pa v primeru uporabe kromiranega jekla pa je ta ogljični odtis 5000. In lahko bi še primerjala in se spuščala v podrobnosti, ampak želim izpostaviti, se pravi, ko govorimo o trajnostni gradnji, se je potrebno odločati tudi umno glede izrabe materialov. V primer, ki ga bi želela izpostaviti, ki ga izvajamo pri nas na InnoRenewju, je stavba našega raziskovalnega inštituta, katero smo sprojektirali sami in katera je v zaključni fazi gradnje, tako da čez nekaj mesecev vas bomo povabili, da se nam pridružite. In glede na to, da sem izpostavljala les, moram izpostaviti, da gre za hibridno konstrukcijo lesa, betona in kovine. Se pravi, gre za umno rabo materialov, kot tisti, ki se ukvarjamo, ki zagovarjamo leseno gradnjo, se hkrati tudi zelo dobro zavedamo, da je potrebno les uporabiti tam, kjer lahko odigra svojo vlogo maksimalno, v določenih primerih pa je seveda potrebno izbrati tudi druge materiale. Gre za stavbo, ki je dejansko demonstracija našega raziskovanja, našega znanja, tudi sam objekt je objekt, na katerem se učimo, raziskujemo. To bo na enem izmed naslednjih dogodkov tema in ki vam bom predstavila vso senzoriko, spremljanje delovanja zgradbe, tako v času gradnje kot potem v uporabi, ampak danes bi pa se osredotočila na okoljski vpliv naše stavbe, in sicer smo izračunali analizo življenjskega cikla od tako imenovanega vhoda do izhoda, se pravi do točke, ko se je hiša zgradila, in ogljični odtis naše stavbe je 3500 ton CO2. Želela bi izpostaviti, zdaj na grafikonu je prikazano, da so sami temeljni, se pravi betonski del je tisti, ki v bistvu prispeva večinski del našega ogljičnega odtisa. V zameno naravi smo se odločili in smo na InnoRenewju v sodelovanju z občino Izolo in pa z družbo Slovenski državni gozdovi posadili v letošnjem in pa lanskem letu 3000 dreves in sicer hrastov, tako da želimo, da les, ki ga imamo vgrajenega v našem objektu, hkrati tudi ogljični odtis na račun drugih materialov izravnavamo. Ampak eno drugo zadevo bi želela izpostaviti, kako lahko znižamo mi ogljični odtis stavbe. In v času gradnje se vsi dobro zavedamo, da ogromno odpadkov tudi nastane. Na InnoRenewju smo se odločili, da bomo pa zbrali odpadni les v času naše gradnje. Seveda je potrebno bilo pristopiti na način, da smo v sodelovanju z izvajalcem, ki je VG5 podjetje skupaj v partnerstvu z Marle, s hišami, da so nam dovolili, da smo bili na gradbišču in zbirali odpadni les, ga sortirali, razmišljali o njegovi dekontaminaciji in ponovni obdelavi oziroma predelavi. Spravi, analizirali smo količine in pa vrste lesa in seveda si bi želeli, da bi zmanjšali količine odpadnega lesa, ki se uporabljajo v energetske namene in pa seveda primerjali, kako lahko to vpliva na analizo življenjskega cikla. Dva študenta magistrskega študijskega programa Univerze na Primorskem trajnostno grajeno okolje sta bila tista pogumna, ki sta dejansko zbirala odslužen les na gradbišču in v celoti les presortirala v 3 glavne kategorije, in sicer masivni les, lesni kompoziti in pa drugo, in pa tudi v posamezni kategoriji razsortirala les v 4 podkategorije. V čisti, nekontaminiran les, v les, ki ima prisotne kovine, v les, ki ima prisotne različne kontaminante, kot je lepilo recimo, in pa v 4. kategorijo tisti, ki ima oboje, tako kovine kot druge kontaminante. Preglednica, se opravičujem, da je v angleščini, ampak kljub vsemu največ, v bistvu odstotkovno, je bilo zbranega kar preko 40% masivnega lesa, ki je bil kontaminiran tako s kovinami kot lepili. Lahko bi šla tudi v druge, katere so tiste podkategorije, ampak če koga zanima, je dobrodošel, da obišče in bomo z veseljem predstavili. Izpostavila bi, da v naši stavbi, da je vgrajenega 1300 kubičnih metrov lesa, odsluženega lesa, ki smo ga zbrali, je manj kot 1%. Izpostavila bi, da smo zaključili študijo in zakaj. Zaključili smo zato, ker nadaljujemo z novim projektom, in sicer projektom v sodelovanju z Univerzo na Primorskem in pa Univerzo v Novi Gorici ter kulturno-izobraževalnega društva Pina, projekt smo poimenovali Proste celice. Gre za inoviranje nekje na preseku tako umetnosti kot znanosti kot gospodarstva, in sicer študentje ravno zdaj kreirajo objekte in na podlagi ene same zahteve z naše strani, in to je izraba tega odsluženega lesa, ki ga imamo zbranega na gradbišču. Z veseljem vas bomo povabili, da si pridete rezultate ogledati čez kak mesec. Sicer pa bi zaključila, da so priložnosti za inoviranje brez dvoma v gradbeništvu z rabo več lesa, ker tudi več lesa potem pride na voljo za ponovno uporabo. Potrebno je se tudi nekako osredotočiti na design for reassembly, disassembly and reassembly, se pravi večkratno uporabo konstrukcijskih elementov. Se opravičujem za angleške izraze, včasih se težko spomnimo slovenske, ampak verjamem, da mi ne zamerite. Zelo na hitro. Gre za priložnost, ki jo imamo tudi v Evropi na politični ravni, če tako rečem, in sicer z zavezami, ki smo si jih zadali, da bomo prišli do ogljične nevtralnosti, je tudi Evropska komisija in naša predsednica prepoznala les kot material, s katerim lahko gradbeni sektor spremenimo v ponor ogljika in verjamem, da nam bo to tudi uspelo, predvsem tudi z kreativnim sektorjem, z sodelovanjem različnih akterjev, katere tudi Evropska komisija združuje v novem Evropskem Bauhausu. Inorenew je partner te iniciative in tudi naša stavba je primer dobre prakse, ki je komunicirana v evropskem prostoru. Za zaključek zgolj še vabilo, pridružite se nam naslednji september leta 2022 v Portorožu, kjer gostimo tako imenovano Wood Rise konferenco, globalno konferenco s približno 1000 udeleženci, predvsem industrije, ki se ukvarja predvsem z visoko leseno gradnjo in še več. Hvala lepa.
Andreja, hvala za predstavitev, predvsem pa čestitke, da ti je uspelo v tako kratkem času vzpostaviti izobraževalno inštitucijo, ki usposablja mlade kadre z novimi smernicami in zahtevami in nenazadnje, da tudi ste tik pred otvoritvijo nove stavbe, ki vse to udejanja v praksi. Moje vprašanje bi bilo, glede na to, da se arhitekti srečujemo z različnimi, vedno bolj zahtevnimi naročniki in tudi regulativo, kaj pomeni kompleksnost LCA izračuna ene stavbe? Koliko traja, kakšne so cene na trgu, kaj to pomeni za arhitekte?
Jaz mislim, da arhitekt lahko odigra pomembno vlogo, predvsem gre za zbiranje podatkov. Tako da lahko rečemo, da je zadeva enostavna, kadar je zelo natančni popis same stavbe izveden. Lahko si predstavljate, kako kompleksno postane, če vsako matico, vsak vijak potrebno ovrednotiti z vidika analize LCA. Tako da, če je popis, se pravi, če se sama rešitev, projekt prevede v tabelo z natančnimi podatki, potem gre zadeva lahko relativno enostavno. Seveda je pa potrebno spremljati potem tudi razvoj na področju emisije, emisijski faktorji, ki so povezani s posameznim materialom, ki se uporabi. Tako da jaz bi rekla, da arhitekti ste lahko tukaj zelo ključni igralci, ki dejansko poskrbite potrebne podatke, na to pa strokovnjaki, ki se ukvarjamo z okoljskim vrednotenjem, to spravimo potem tudi v številke ogljičnega odtisa in drugih indikatorjev okoljskih vplivov, relativno enostavno.
Hvala za ta odgovor. Bi pa še vprašala, pri vas v bistvu izvajate izračune LCA?
Drži.
Koliko recimo koliko jih imate zdaj na mizi, da jih izračunavate?
Kar nekaj je tega, gre pa, da ne izračunavamo zgolj za stavbe, ampak tudi za proizvode in pa poleg tega ne gre zgolj za analizo življenjskega cikla, ampak gre tudi za tako imenovano social life cycle assessment, ki je v porastu, ki je tista, ki dejansko je nujno potrebna. Lahko na kratko rečem, da imamo 48 projektov, v katerih v polovica od teh je analiza LCA vključena, tako da odgovor neposreden je težko reči. Je pa mogoče bolj zanimiv odgovor ta, da je trenutno so 3 stavbe, ki so v izračunavi.
Se Levels še vedno razvija. In pogledali smo zdaj, kakšno je stanje v evropskem prostoru, no v Sloveniji pa je takole. Pri nas je razvoj kazalnikov za trajnostne stavbe se je pričel nekako z tole nalogo z Ministrstva za okolje in prostor leta 2016 in ta naloga se je imenovala Pregled sistemov trajnostnih kriterijev s prilogom prenosa, ki smo izdelali Gradbeni inštitut za RMK in Zavod za gradbeništvo za Ministrstvo za okolje in prostor. Namen pa je bil, da pripravimo neke strokovne podlage za kriterije trajnostne gradnje za javne stavbe v slovenskem okolju. No, naloga je pravzaprav nastajala v istem času kot GRC študija, zato smo jo tudi vključili v nalogo. Tako je pravzaprav Levels že zelo zgodaj postal podlaga za slovenske kazalnike, ki so seveda v razvoju. Od začetka leta 2019 pa se kazalniki razvijajo v okviru projekta Life IP Care for Climate, ki je sicer projekt zelo široko vsebino, od ravnanja s hrano, vplivov na podnebje, pa mobilnosti, varčevanja z energijo. No in en delček te naloge, tega širšega projekta je tudi naloga razvoja kazalnikov za trajnostno vrednotenje stavb. No in prva različica slovenskih kazalnikov je pravzaprav tik pred izdajo. No, pa si poglejmo majčkeno, kakšna je, zelo na hitro. Ta struktura ohranja teh 6 makrociljev iz Levelsa, ker se naslanja v osnovi nanj, s pripadajočim naborom kazalnikov seveda. Poglejmo se zdaj kazalnik. Ta prvi kazalnik se nanaša na rabo energije v fazi uporabe stavbe. To je tipično računski postopek, ki poteka na podoben način kot že znani izračuni rabe energije, skladno z našo zakonodajo, z pravilnikom. No, pri čemer seveda računamo, da z novim predpisom, z novim puresom se bo ta metodologija še bolj približal. Potem je tukaj drugi kazalnik, potencial globalnega segrevanja v življenjskem ciklu stavbe. No, tudi to je računski postopek in sicer izdelava LCA za stavbo. Analiza na tem nivoju je seveda zahtevna in lahko pričakujemo postopno uvajanje v prakso, širšo prakso. Potem imamo tukaj scenarijske postopke. Prvi se nanaša na pregled materialov, generalno popis, bill of material, temu rečemo. To je popis teh posameznih materialov, vgrajenih v stavbo, ki je načeloma zelo podoben našemu popisu del, vendar nekoliko bolj podroben, ker ga potem tudi v tem postopku ga je potrebno ta popis razčleniti na materiale in razvrstiti v 4 glavne skupine po materialih: kovinske, nekovinske in tiste na osnovi biomase in na fosilne energetske materiale. Pri nas bo najprej treba verjetno nekako bolj urediti to popise gradbenih del, standardizirati postopek, da bo ta popis bill of material lažje izvesti. No, potem imamo scenarijski postopek življenjska doba stavbe, ki v bistvu temelji na prejšnjem popisu in doda se mu še prilagodljivost in razgradnja. To se pravi podatki za življenjsko dobo stavbe, posameznih elementov, sistemov in pa možnosti za razgradnjo in ponovno uporabo ter recikliranje. Temu sledi scenarijski postopek odpadki in materiali pri razgradnji in rušitvi. Tudi ta, podobno kot prejšnji, temelji na popisu in izhaja iz pregleda materialov, bill of materials, pri čemer seveda se fokusira na odpadke. Naslednji kazalnik je celovita računska analiza LCA vplivov stavbe na okolje. Ta pa je relativno kompleksna in zahteva visok nivo znanja, uporabo specializiranega orodja in pa dostop. Prav to zna biti največji problem, dostop do širokega nabora podatkovnih zbirk, ki jih pravzaprav za slovenske proizvode nimamo. Namesto tega je možno uporabiti generične zbirke podatkov, ampak to je že druga zgodba. Rezultate je potrebno podati povsem tako natančno, kot pa seveda je potrebno vedno pri teh LCA analizah, glede na posamezne kategorije vplivov, globalno segrevanje, razgradnja ozona, tvorba pritlehnega ozona, zakislevanje, eutrofikacija. Potem pa je tukaj potrebno dodati še izraba naravnih mineralnih materialov in pa izraba fosilnih virov. Naslednji kazalnik se nanaša na učinkovito rabo vode in sicer v fazi, ko je stavba v porabi. To je relativno enostaven računski postopek, za katerega je celo na voljo Excelovo orodje. Rezultat se nekako poda v kubičnih metrih vode na uporabnika na leto. Nanaša se seveda na stavbo, na stavbne elemente. Kazalnik kakovost notranjega zraka, naslednji v vrsti, se ravno tako obravnava računsko in sicer tako, da se preveri prezračevanje stavbe in se kakovost notranjega zraka glede na prezračevanje kategorizira, glede na predpisane parametre, naprimer CO2 tipično, relativna vlaga, trdni delci in še druge nevarne snovi. Drugi del tega kazalnika pa temelji na sistematičnem popisu vseh finalnih materialov glede škodljivih snovi, ki emitirajo v notranjost stavbe. Potem je še kazalnik čas izven območja toplotnega ugodja. Ta se ravno tako obravnava računsko, rezultat pa se poda kot odstotek časa, ko je stavba izven toplotnega ugodja. Podobno tudi naslednji kazalnik, zelo na isti način obravnava stavbo oziroma toplotno ugodje, le da je potrebno upoštevati bodoče klimatske razmere, zato da se predvidi, kako se bo stavba obnašala v daljni budočnosti. Vzame se razmere v letu 2030 in 2050. Naslednji kazalnik oziroma zadnji kazalnik se nanaša na stroške v življenjskem ciklu stavbe, pri tem se pa računsko z metodo LCC, Life Cycle Cost analizo, za stavbo določi njeno neto sedanjo vrednost vseh skupnih stroškov preko njenega življenjskega cikla. No, tudi to je v bistvu največja ovira, običajno pridobiti vse podatke in vse robne pogoje analize. No, večina kazalnikov, kot vidimo, je glede na postopek vezana na tisto prvo fazo stavbe, bolj na zasnovo in načrtovanje stavbe. To se pravi takrat, ko imamo še možnost odločati o obliki, materialih, o stavbnih sistemih same stavbe. V tej fazi se dejansko preverja performance stavbe saj smo videli, različnimi metodami, bolj ali manj enostavnimi računskimi postopki. Tako kot je recimo tukaj prikazano na tej shemi, se pravi, ta shema je za vodo, za rabo vode, se večina dogaja v fazi načrtovanja, lahko pa tudi kasneje, seveda, ko je stavba že zgrajena ali celo v uporabi, ugotavljamo dejansko stanje po nekem kazalniku in celo primerjamo z načrtovanjem. Vendar bistvo vrednotenja je v doseganju trajnostne stavbe, se pravi tega nivoja, zato je vrednotenje kazalnikov potrebno vključiti res zgodaj v fazo načrtovanja, takrat, ko lahko še izvajamo korekcije in izboljšave. In tukaj igra pomembno vlogo projektantska ekipa, projektant, arhitekt in vsa ostala ekipa, ki seveda mora delovati povezano, koordinirano in dejansko odločati o nekih kakovostih stavbe. Zato lahko rečemo, da je faza načrtovanja za doseganje nivoja trajnostnih stavb res ključna. No, pri vsakem kazalniku pa je zelo pomembno, da je usklajen z slovensko zakonodajo, za prakso, da se za njega pridobijo primerjalne vrednosti, zagotovi programska orodja, da so na voljo podatki, da je na voljo vse, tudi znanje o metodah, orodjih, standardizaciji, o napredku, da imamo tudi možnost si pogledati, kako zadeva izgleda, se pravi nek nabor izgledov in izkušenj je fajn imeti. Brez vsega tega v bistvu bomo težko dosegli, da bo sistem prišel v prakso in tudi dobro zaživel. Zato se vzporedno z razvojem kazalnikov razvija tudi podporno okolje in tako imenovana e-platforma trajnostne gradbe, ki seveda nastaja postopoma in pa v nekem sodelovanju, tesnem sodelovanju s strokovnjaki različnih področij. Preko te e-platforme se bodo odvijala tudi spletna usposabljanja, predvideno je interaktivno sodelovanje z uporabniki in pa tudi testiranje. Zlasti od projektantov v bistvu potrebujemo neke take povratne informacije, zato ste zelo lepo vabljeni k sodelovanju. Kakšno pa so pričakovanja za naprej? Katera so tista odprta vprašanja? Level se še razvija, kot smo videli, in enostavno moramo računati na ta razvoj in na te spremembe. Zadnje spremembe, ki so se zgodile, mislim, da letos zgodaj spomladi, se na primer nanašajo na te 3 ravni, ki so se spremenile. Po novem so povezani s potekom procesa gradnje. Raven 1 se nekako odvija na idejni zasnovi stavbe, raven 2 se odvija v fazi načrtovanja in izgradnje stavbe in potem raven 3 se dejansko nanaša na zgrajeno stavbo, ko ta deluje in je v uporabi. Tako da imamo te 3 nivoje drugače kot prej. Poleg tega je prišlo tudi do nekih vsebinskih dopolnitev, do vsebinskih sprememb. Naprimer, dodano je v Levels je dodano področje svetlobnega in vizualnega ugodja, pa akustike in zaščite pred hrupom. Dodana je tudi povečana nevarnost poplav in še nekaj teh kazalnikov ali podkazalnikov. To so sicer še res zelo grobi osnutki, omembe, tukaj še sploh ne moramo govoriti niti o približni metodologiji, ampak vseeno. Ob tem se nam pa postavlja vprašanje vsebinskega širjenja take sheme ali pa sistema, detajliranja in zmožnosti obvladovanja take sheme, pravzaprav to ni tržna shema. Kako bo ta nova zasnova levelsa ali pa potem tudi slovenskih kazalnikov funkcionirala z toliko bolj detaljnim in širšim naborom kazalnikov, to bo potrebno dejansko šele preveriti. Ne glede na to, pa se slovenski kazalniki seveda temu prilagajajo, kot sem že rekla, in dopolnjujejo. In zelo pomembno vprašanje, ki se odpira z uvedbo kazalnikov pri nas, ravno tako kot drugje, ali to pomeni dodatno delo za projektiranje, ali to morda pomeni samo drugačno delo. V fazi uvajanja bo to zagotovo zelo velik vložek in napor za obvladovanje teh novih, recimo temu, načinov dela. Računamo pa lahko na pomoč digitalizacije. Tudi Levels predvideva uporabo digitalnih orodij kot pripomočka. Digitalizacija postopka in implementacija v BIM računamo, da bo prinesla z 3D projektiranjem, z 3D modeli tudi v bistvu vsebujoče podatke, potrebne podatke za analize in orodja za analize, na vsak način neke vrste avtomatizacijo postopkov, kar bi sigurno moralo časovno in kakovostno optimirati delo. No, in še, da zaključim, metodologija za trajnostno vrednotenje stavb je lahko eno izmed zelo pomembnih in močnih orodij za doseganje ciljev za prehod v trajnostno družbo, ker vemo, da z uporabo metodologije načrtovanja stavb lahko dvignemo na nek višji trajnostni nivo in gradimo dejansko trajnostne stavbe. Zato je priprava in implementacija metodologije za trajnostno vrednotenje zares pomembna in pomembni so kazalniki, da so izbrani res premišljeno. Kakšen pa je dober kazalnik? No, že spet imam na desni strani napisano nekako, kako ne izgleda. Biti mora široko sprejemljiv, uporaben za različne tipe stavb, dostopen, razumljiv, primerljiv z minimalnimi projektnimi zahtevami, ga je mogoče verificirati. Potem mora biti v končni fazi tudi blizu politiki in potrebam javnega sektorja in tako naprej. Vpliv metodologije na načrtovanje vemo, da bo velik. Metodologija bo vplivala na to, da bomo dosegali bolj premišljene in kreativne poteze pri iskanju rešitev za gradnjo, za rabo in za delovanje stavb, tudi za končni fazi razgradnjo stavb. Metodologija bo vplivala na ta naš holističen pristop v načrtovanju, vplivala bo tudi na način proceduralnega dela, razmišljanja in na naše odgovorno delovanje. In da bo uspešna, bo morala metodologija postati dejansko tisti vraščen del procesa gradnje in to po vseh fazah, zlasti pa v fazi načrtovanja, ker le na ta način bo lahko dala otipljive in prave rezultate pri razvoju trajnostno družbo. Tako, to je bilo z moje strani vse. Hvala lepa za pozornost. Če so pa kakšna vprašanja, sem pa tudi na voljo.
Sabina, najlepša hvala za to obširno predstavitev kazalnikov, ki so res kompleksni, ampak lahko rečemo, da so celoviti in prvič dobivamo celovit pogled v vse vidike trajnostne gradnje z teh parametrov, ki jih lahko merimo. In kot si rekla, prihajamo do tega, da lahko začnemo projektirati, da bo to vplivalo na projektiranje, to je dejstvo, da bo otežilo, ampak na drugi strani bi mogli te vse parametre imeti v uvidu že na začetku, torej v bistvu tudi izobraževalni sistem, če bi vklopil te parametre na začetku, se zahtevnost, kompleksnost projektiranja verjetno ne bi tako otežila. Kakšni so vaši odnosi z izobraževalnimi inštitucijami, ki na trg dajejo mlade strokovnjake? Ali vidite, da bo treba tudi tam začeti in kje so največje ovire?
Jaz močno se strinjam s tabo, Ana. Prav gotovo je zelo pomembno izobraževanje in zelo pomembno je, da pridejo te vsebine in da prihajajo pravzaprav te vsebine tudi v učilnice, da rečem. Jaz sem zelo vesela, ker je kolegica Kudnarjeva velikokrat poudarila, koliko se pri njih s tem ukvarjajo in koliko imajo že tega programa, koliko dejansko izobražujejo ljudi in tudi praktično delajo na tem, da se dejansko ljudje spoznavajo oziroma da se študentje spoznavajo z to problematiko. Jaz se bojim, da to gre še pri nas v Sloveniji še prepočasi, prehod v bistvu iz tistih teoretičnih nivojev na širši splošni nivo, pa v učilnice, pa v, recimo temu, še nižje nekako. Že od vrtca naprej moramo začeti otroke izobraževati v tej smeri. Bi si želela tega več. Ovira, ja, mogoče smo malo ne vem, trdi, prepočasni, naši sistemi meljejo počasi. Nasplošno je nekako splošno znano, da gradbeništvo nekako je tisti, da ne rečem dinozaver, ko je treba, da se težko karkoli premakne, ne. Ampak moram pa po drugi strani reči, da opažam že zelo velik nekako dojemanja tega tudi pri, ne vem, publiki, pri določenem segmentu, dojemanja tega znanja in da ne rečem povpraševanja po tem znanju. Tako da sem zelo vesela, da je tako. Bi si pa želela, da gre hitreje.
Hvala za tvoj odgovor. Čisto zaključek. Tudi pri vas se izvajate LCA analize, je tako?
Ja.
Mogoče, če nam lahko poveš, koliko imate pa vi takih projektov, ki jih zdaj ocenjujete, vrednotite skozi celo LCA analizo in kdo so glavni naročniki teh projektov?
Mi večino teh projektov izvajamo v okviru raziskovalnih projektov, se pravi bolj študijsko. Naročnikov je zelo malo, ker dejansko je to še en tak, bi rekla, kar velik zalogaj. Druga stvar, ki pa, to se nanaša se na stavbe, ta del, tole, kar sem zdaj povedala. Druga zadeva, ki bi jo pa morda želela poudariti, je pa to, da je na Zavodu za gradbeništvo izdelujemo tudi LCA analize za produkte, podobno kot je omenjala Andreja, pri čemer tudi izdajamo okoljske deklaracije za produkte. Tudi teh proizvodov bi si želeli, da bi jih bilo več, zlasti slovenskih proizvodov, ki bi že imeli tako deklaracijo oziroma listino o vplivih na okolje, ampak jih imamo pa nekako v seznamu po nekaj 10, mislim, zelo točne številke res nimam. Tako da se ukvarjamo s tem čedalje več, upamo pa, da bo tega tudi še več.
Sabina, hvala, da si bila z nami za tvojo predstavitev. Dragi gostje, hvala vsem, ki ste spremljali ta prvi del, ki je bil bolj posvečen pristopu od zgoraj navzdol, znanstvenemu, političnemu, dobrih praks iz tujine. Naslednji sklop, ki sledi od 3. ure naprej, zdaj vmes bomo imeli pauzo, bo posvečen bolj praksi, torej projektom, ki so že na mizah, kjer se ta znanstveni del prenaša v kreativni, v prakso. Tako da hvala, ker ste bili z nami prvi del in sledite nam ponovno ob 15. uri. Hvala.
Lepo pozdravljeni na drugem delu današnjega dogodka. To je prenos veščin, kjer predstavljamo izkušnje uveljavljenih kreativcev in strokovnjakov v povezavi s podjetništvom. In sicer tokrat na področju arhitekture, urbanizma, v povezavi z inženirskimi strokami in gradbeništvom. V tem drugem delu se bomo posvetili primerom iz prakse. Razmišljali bomo o tem, kako graditi bolj trajnostno, manj energetsko in materialno potratno, kako zaščititi vire, ki jih imamo na voljo, da bi dosegli boljše grajeno okolje tudi za uporabnika. S tem je potrebno začeti že pri načrtovanju. In prvi tak primer je Brainport Smart District UN Studija iz Amsterdama. Za razliko od vsega, kar so doslej projektirali, je urbana vizija UN Studija za pametno okrožje Brainport prilagodljivo omrežje, ki se bo razvijalo glede na potrebe njegovih prebivalcev. Brainport Smart District kot tak ni vnaprej določen fiksni načrt, ki je najprej načrtovan in potem grajen, ampak gre za neko odzivno urbano ambicijo, kjer bosta načrtovanje in gradnja tesno povezana s postopnim razvojem, ki ga bodo vodili uporabniki. Projekt bo predstavila Dana Berman, vodja oddelka za urbanizem pri UN Studiju v Amsterdamu in urbani strateg pri Unsense. To je zagonsko podjetje UN Studija, ki se osredotoča na povezavo med tehnologijo in grajenim okoljem. Hello, Dana.
Hello, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Excellent, and you can see the screen?
Yes, we can see the screen. So please tell us more about the Brainport Smart District and how you envision this new urban planning through user experience.
Okay. First of all, thank you for inviting us to talk about this great project, and greetings from sunny Amsterdam. Today is a beautiful day here, which is quite unusual. I am Dana Berman. As you said, I'm the lead urban designer, the senior urban designer at UN Studio, an associate director. I joined UN Studio about 7 years ago to start a team of urbanists and architects and thinkers who, together with the whole studio, think about how to create new models for city planning. We are a group of close to 200 people sitting in Amsterdam. As we said, we design, think, innovate, and build projects all over the world. This is a glimpse into our hallway, the Hall of Fame, how you enter the studio. We are based in Amsterdam, but we also have small offices in Frankfurt, in Shanghai, in Hong Kong. We're opening offices in Dubai, in Melbourne. We are growing, we are thinking, our clients are changing, the industry is changing, and it's a great time to think about cities and how we can change them and make them better. We are a group of people, but we design for people, and we want to create spaces that are social, that are inclusive. We also create iconic places. This is in Rotterdam, the Erasmus Bridge was built 20 years ago that facilitated a great growth and expansion of the city. These iconic places are becoming part of people's identity, right? We create places that have really lasting impact on people. In this case, here's a sailor who sails out of Rotterdam and has tattooed the bridge on his back. So speaking about, feeling connected to a place, this is a great honor for us. We create places for people. We like to connect people. We like to connect places. We do a lot of infrastructural work of cable cars and train stations. We also like to create cultural spaces because these are places that people come with a purpose of learning, of enjoying, of meeting one another. Train stations are not just a place to take a train from. For us, they're really a place to celebrate technology and celebrate one another and creating a new room for the city. So with a kind of a collection of iconic places and spaces, we are now at a time that we need to think about how to move from this iconicity into something that will help us secure a more resilient future for us. And just to talk about resiliency, in Studio, we're not just architects and urban designers, we are also researchers. We speculate about the future. We also think about interior spaces and products. I'm personally am focusing on the urban scale. But at the top of this diagram, we also have UNSense, and I heard you mention UNSense. This is our sister company that looks into technology and the built environment. And together, the hardware and the software come together for projects. We try to analyze how can we create spaces that respond to changes in the future, changes like new types of technology and new types of materials. How can we integrate them today without even knowing what those will be in the future? Technology changes so quickly. Cities are quite static. It takes a long time until we develop them, until they get built. So we have to anticipate, we have to speculate on how we can integrate these unknowns into our built environments. So we all share a common idea and feeling about our kind of our urban perspectives, about cities and places that are built out of kind of mixed of views, about connectivity, about circulation and walkability, about healthy spaces, resilient environments. That's something that binds us all together as designers at UN Studio. And just to talk a little bit of how we work, we develop our own toolboxes, we develop our own methodology, how we research a topic, how we build networks and groups of specialists who come and help us develop ideas. We test our ideas in computational processes, and then we also communicate them. And that's an important part of the project as well. How do we communicate our ideas? How do we share it? And how do we get people excited about these futures that we are proposing? And everything comes into Brainport Smart District. All of our tools and methodologies and thinking are placed into this project. The most innovative district in the world, how it likes to brand itself. This is a project we've been involved with for the past 4 years, together with the client. This is a very collaborative project. The client is the Brainport Foundation. They are situated in the south of the Netherlands, in what we like to call the Silicon Valley of the Netherlands, in a city called Eindhoven, in that region, and that's where that project is, as well, in the region of Eindhoven.
Dana, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but do you have a presentation maybe? Because we only see you and I have a feeling like you didn't share your screen. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh my God. Oh my God. All this time I was showing beautiful images.
Yeah, but you can maybe start again, I mean, with images. It's okay, if you
How
can.
about now?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Please
this is
put
us.
it
Can
full
you see?
screen.
Can you see the pictures? Can you see the pictures now?
Yes, now we see the pictures, yes.
I am so sorry. I am so sorry.
It's okay.
So this is us, and this is where we are in Amsterdam and around the world. Thank you for mentioning it, Mika. These are the kind of places that we create in the bridge that I mentioned over Rotterdam. One of my favorite images of the sailor who tattooed the bridge on his back. The kind of connectivity that we're trying to create, really iconic places in the city that really celebrate this idea of connectivity in cable cars, in several projects around the world, and cultural spaces that really bring people together. As I mentioned, train stations are not just to take a train, they're also to really enjoy an urban feeling. And this iconicity that draws people into the city, but the question of how can we move beyond the icon and really think about resiliency. This is about our ecosystem of knowledge, UN Studio in the middle, and the supporting groups together with UNSense. And then our urban perspectives of how we see the city with our tools that we use that I mentioned. And Brainport. Was that a quick jump through? We're going to just have to jump into it. Brainport Smart District. So what is Brainport Smart District? Brainport Smart District is social. It is about bringing people together, creating a community of like-minded people and people who also want to be supported by new technology and innovation. It is also circular. So it's pretty much thinking about future resources that we have and how to create new models of usage of our materials and going beyond materials, how also to save the water systems and the food that we produce and use, and create new connections in a neighborhood. It's also all about innovation. This is really the key word for this project, is innovation. And it's innovation on multiple levels. It's on the level of social connections, on the level of data usage, on the level of building methods, on the level of our connection with nature. BSD was created by a group of people, but really the visionary behind it was Elfie Nellison. And with her guidance and her enthusiasm, she put together this idea of the quadruple helix. It was, of course, not her idea, but she really adopted this model for success, where the government, the municipality, plus the industry, the education, and the society, the users, come together in order to determine the future of this place. So it is no longer only the client who decides what it is, let's say in this case, maybe the municipality, or the architect or the urban designer who would sketch an idea on paper. A resilient urban design is about bringing all these stakeholders together and together finding the best solutions that could fit that specific location. This is what it is today. There's only one building on site. It's a beautiful site. There's only one building on site, which is a school that was built for the neighboring developments. It is the water basin of the whole area, so it has a great significance in terms of water retention. But there will be a great development that's going to come there. There's going to be over 2,000 housing units in various densities. There's going to be also a dedicated business park, but also other areas where people could work. There will be a lot of green space, cultural space, and productive space, what we call, for people to really test and think about new solutions for landscape and for the buildings. It has a train station next to it, so one of the great assets of the location. So it can really follow ideas of sustainability, also on the level of mobility. So it doesn't require to drive there with a car. Yeah, we started with the BSD vision. So there was an urban vision that we have created together with the client. The client, as I said, is the Brainport Foundation. They've traveled for 2 years around the world and talked to all the different innovators who came up with different ideas of how to build a new development. We joined after these 2 years and together tried to give these ideas of new ways of living and working some kind of a form and an essence. We work together in a group. UN Studio stands for United Network, so we built a network around us, invited landscape designers and specialists in circularity. The model is quite simple. There's not a lot of houses that could be built there. The site is bigger than what is needed to build. So we've created this kind of density around the central park with different strips that run along the waterline, the existing water lines. And with that, try to create an atmosphere of some kind of urbanity, different neighborhoods and different densities, but still that all come together under this, around this special park in the middle. It's going to be a mixed-use development. There will be living and working and sharing, also different kinds of landscape. And the concept of sharing is something that was also developed specifically for this development. Retail will be hard to facilitate within this development because there's retail around that site. But the concept of sharing allows the users to actually create their own economy and to share it between themselves and people from the outside. And that we hope will generate also the sense of community. And then telescoping down to the level of the building, mix everything, mix uses on all different levels. That concept of that shared community is something that was new to the client, and it's new to the users. So they are, starting to understand what does it mean to create a development where you have to create some shared space, either it be internal or external. But the essence of that is that we want to create something that is really made in Helmond. That's where BSD is, where Brainport Smart District is located. Something that will generate an identity of the place. As you could see, it's just a green field right now. it also needs to be future-oriented and natural, two things that may seem contradictory to one another, but in this place, they would come together. And this future-oriented will be expressed in the materiality, but also in the data collection, and natural because it is in a natural field, and also in materiality, and the actual activity on site, which will have lots of gardens and sport places and areas to really enjoy proximity to nature. And for that, our approach to landscape is, in a sense, no longer a mosaic landscape as it is traditionally, different parts of landscape separated. It's actually bringing different types of landscapes together with that different types of activities, and also connecting landscape to urbanity. And doing that by creating really productive areas of landscape where energy could be captured, that water could be stored, food could be grown. But also bringing that landscape right into the neighborhoods, and really created connected areas that the landscape brings those neighborhoods together. And it's also a cultural landscape, and that's kind of in relation to the Central Park. It's a place for people to come and enjoy time together. And on the right-hand side, some ideas of kind of, future production that will serve the neighborhood. As I mentioned, there's a train station, but there's also roads that connect the district to the surrounding area. But the ambition is to create a more sustainable and a carbon neutral environment. And there is currently a discussion about what kind of future mobilities could come there, what kind of infrastructure do we need to facilitate, to already think about for the district, and how can we actually think about the economy of scale, and how can we also allow people from outside of the district to use that mobility, and in a sense to expand the network of this green mobility, smart mobility. There is a whole concept of a data universe. There is an ethics board that is looking at data sharing, data privacy, specifically for BSD. There will be a BSD platform that will allow people to share and exchange data. And that's something that UN-Sense, sister company, is very much involved in, and is putting the foundation in the ground for that. So that data universe will really expand to all elements of the site, and will allow people and places to be connected. And sustainability goes into, of course, energy in terms of reduction of usage, of the production of energy, and the sharing of and the management of the energy system. Water is going to be collected, purified, shared, and of course the food systems grown locally and healthy. And for that, we did all this analysis of what is the local diet and what would be the ingredients that would be needed to be supplied from within the district and from the surrounding area. How much water are we going to use, and how much water can we share with the surrounding area? And that goes on for energy in order to create energy independence as soon as possible. And then expanding the concept of circularity to health, to new business models, and to new types of materials. In order to facilitate all of this thinking, the Brainport Foundation created a body called the Q team. And for that, we've created a Q book, which really stands for a quality book. In that quality book, there are 8 different domains or program lines that the foundation is dividing the district into in terms of the planning for building in the future. And that is a domain that is dedicated solely for circularity, another one for participation, social and safety, health, digital, of course, mobile, and water. These domains, so these program lines, are the foundation of everything that can be built there. And the quality team is overseeing this development through the eyes of the quality that has been set for each one of these domains. We, together with the Brainport Foundation, have written a book that is a guideline in a sense book, and it's a book of ambition and inspiration. And that book will guide the future developers in the ambitions on kind of the destinations that the foundation wants to reach when it comes to building. It looks quite dry, it may be indeed dry. And in order to move away from this dryness and to answer the question that everybody asks us for 3 years, what is it going to look like? We started putting together kind of visuals about how each environment in Brainport Foundation will look like, and what are the elements that actually make these environments. So if it's water purification elements, it will be on buildings or gardens or different types of energy capturing, and then also activities in gardens. And with that, starting to create kind of the identity and the feeling of what it's going to look like when it's there. And we're only supporting the client in that. So there will be currently over 2,000 developers who have already applied to build there. Each one will get a plot of about 50, 100, I think maximum 200 units on it. And they apply with their innovation. They come forward to the Q team and say, I have something, an idea that I want to test on a small scale. 50 to 100 units is quite small scale. I will test it there. I will learn from it. If I fail, I'll have an opportunity to succeed. And then I will take this idea to the rest of the Netherlands or the world. And you can see here some of the ideas that already some of the developers have come up with. And we are now at the design guidelines at taking all these ideas and trying to translate it really into space, both into the infrastructure elements and to the landscape. We are tasked with creating guidelines that don't limit the developers, but actually try to stimulate them and inspire them. And we are trying to inspire them by trying to test different systems, different approaches, trying to create models that many developers could take, and by interpreting our guidelines and our system, we'll be able to create something that will be different for each plot, but will still have some kind of unity within it. That goes for the landscape and the water mechanism that is there, how to integrate that and to create an identity and an atmosphere out of that. And same goes, of course, for the ecology and really trying to think about the local element and the unique elements of the site itself and trying to capture it within the built environment. So we are now creating passports for each one of the different plots, passports that will guide people on what are the most important elements that should be built in each one of these plots, with the ability to really innovate within that and to test their innovation. And all of that goes through a rigorous process of consultation with the public. We are actually, as we speak now, in the process of intense consultation with all the parties involved, with developers, with individuals who want to build there, with the different academic institutions who are involved in this project. Our core team is actually consisted of us as designers, but also the municipality and the foundation. And we go through rounds and rounds of ideations and discussions and visioning in order to come up with a model that would actually satisfy all the people involved and really help stimulate inspiration. And you know, not all ideas can be taken. All voices are being heard. People like to get their hands dirty. They like to sketch. They like to build models. When we did that before COVID, it was really an inspiring process for everyone. We have done a lot of it online, of course, in the past year. But it for sure will give BSD the voice or the identity of the people who are going to live there. And that's extremely important for us because Brainport Smart District is Brainport Smart District of that region. It's not of anywhere else. And that is manifested in what it's going to be built like. That's it, as quickly as I could within my time.
Okay, thank you, Dana. Maybe I just ask you one question, that an architect would ask, So I think it's a kind of a new territory for you in studio as well, because you're quite well known for these iconic buildings, and then suddenly you go into sustainability, and maybe giving power to the users to actually contribute to a particular space. How is it going to look like exactly? this is the question. How is urban planning and architecture going to look like in the future?
That's the $1 million question. I think when we think about how it's going to look like, and that's something that we heard from users, is that it's not that we're going to go from what we know now to something completely different in the future. Is that there are all these stages in between that will show the evolution of our thinking, and that's users are saying, we should allow innovation, we should allow things that we have not seen anywhere else to be built there, but maybe not everywhere. Maybe there are areas where we're going to test things that, look different, but at the same time, there are areas that should be, areas that gives people the feeling that it's familiar, that they feel comfortable in it. So no, we don't know what it's going to look like. We hope that it's going to perform better, buildings, right? That they're going to be more comfortable, more flexible. That's for sure what they're going to look like. And that they will still give the comfort that we are looking for.
Maybe another question, what kind of data are you going to collect from the users? And do you already have an idea how you're going to use it for the future planning?
Yes, so UNSense is very much busy with building the model for data collection. And the main concept is that if we are able to share data, if we're able to share knowledge of our production of energy, of how much water we consume, we will be able to find ways to save on income and our expenses. And with that income and with that, we will be able to upgrade our quality of life and have more leisure time. So the idea is that different types of data collections will take place in different plots. In the UNSense plot, which they are planning on building 100 houses in order to test, the data collection will be anything from usage of the public space to actually really usage inside people's flats. And that will have to be done with consent of the users.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for being and sharing this with us. We will follow the project in the future, and I'm quite sure it will be something outstanding.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
Hey, thank you. Naš naslednji primer pa prihaja iz povezave med Dansko univerzo, kjer so leta 2020 zasnovali nov univerzitetni in magistrski program na področju gradbeništva in arhitekturnega inženirstva, ki se osredotoča na trajnost in digitalne tehnologije, ki se uporabljajo predvsem za stavbe in mesta. Z nami bosta Hugo Mulder iz SDU-ja in Kor Stockholm Pulsgard iz arhitekturnega biroja GXN, ki ga mogoče poznate po trajnostnih stavbah. Predstavila pa nam bosta, kako je krožna hiša informirala novo izobraževanje in govorila bosta o odgovornosti, ki jo prinaša poučevanje nove generacije gradbenih inženirjev in arhitektov. Če imate vprašanja, še to sem pozabila, jih lahko zastavljate v naš Facebook feed ali pa na Zoomu in jih bomo poskušali dobiti odgovore na nje. So now I would like to welcome Hugo and Kor. Are you with us?
Yeah.
Hi. So how is everything with you? Are we going to do the presentation?
Yeah, let's start the presentation, and I have the slide lined up. I don't know if you can see it.
We see it.
Excellent. So I'll just start off. Thank you, Mika, for which I assume was a kind introduction.
Yes, that was an introduction in Slovenian of what you are going to talk about, hopefully.
Amazing. It's great to be here with you today. And from what I gather, it's sort of a wonderful event that's being set up, and I think it's a very important event as well. I'm here with Kor today, and we will both take about half of the presentation. I am a researcher and teacher at the University of Southern Denmark, and I sort of represent the academic side in this presentation. Core is representing industry, if I may say it that way, and GXN in particular, and he will later introduce GXN as well. And we'll talk today about a collaboration that we undertook, a collaboration that we feel is a step towards a more sustainable built environment, and that's why we want to share it with you today in this platform. Our collaboration took place as a first-year design studio for students in civil and architectural engineering, where we focused on sustainable design based on circularity. So I'll just have a little outline of the presentation for today to give you a sense of what we'll be talking about. I'll start off with introducing the section of civil and architectural engineering that I'm part of, and I'll talk a little bit about the new education that we developed and the design studio in particular. Then I'll talk a little bit about the problem context. Then Core is going to take over, talk about GXN, circular building, and introducing the Circle House project. And if we have some time left, we can talk a little bit about the output of the studio and the student work. So the main campus of STU is in Odense, which is the third city of Denmark, and I am part of the section of civil and architectural engineering in the technology department. And this particular section operates from both Copenhagen and Odense, and it's organized along a number of topical research areas. At the moment, we have 4 research areas within the group: building structures, building facades, building envelopes, and computational design and digital fabrication as the third one, and urban resilience, which is the 4th research area. So very briefly, the structures group, the structures work is probably the least surprising in a section for civil engineering, but it has a long history at STU, and it's internationally recognized. We also have a large testing facility to break large concrete elements, as you can see in this image, and that is to understand better how they work. We do work in facade engineering. This is sort of a growing area of interest where we do some pioneering work on simulation, virtual prototyping, and indoor climate, which is all related to building performance, which reflects, as you can see in this image here, on how cities function. We now have a lab with a number of large industrial robots, and recently we do a lot of work in robotic 3D concrete printing. Those are actually not the robots that you see in this image. These are universal robots that are made in Odense, and they are particularly good at working alongside people. So we're looking at how we can make things together with robots. And the 4th research area is that of urban resilience, which is led by Professor Nicola Tollin, who holds the UNESCO Chair for Urban Resilience. And the work here looks at climate change in cities, and through research and education, it proposes strategies for cities to deal with this change. So as you can see, this is quite an interesting mix of disciplines, and we have come together to develop a new engineering education that is research-based. As you can see at the top of this diagram, the 4 research areas that I just mentioned, structures, facades, computational design, and urban resilience, they all 4 feed into a common Bachelor of Science. That is a 3-year program, and that started last year. We're now developing the Master of Science program that will start in 2023, following up on the Bachelor of Science. The Master will also have a collective part, but then it will sort of separate in specializations in, again, these 4 research areas. And we've identified 3 basic pillars, basically, that we focus on heavily in the program. And these are the pillars of sustainability, digital practice, and design. Now, if we then zoom into the Bachelor of Science, which are the first 3 years of the education, then we can see that there are 3 constants in each semester, or 3 parts, which are fundamental knowledge. This is stuff like mathematics and statics. Then there is applied knowledge, sort of engineering knowledge. And then we have a design studio, which is a big part and recurring part of every semester. And this is done with the belief that engineers are designers, and that design is a skill that can be taught and that should be practiced and practiced and practiced. So studio is a very common element in architectural education. It's a very open form of teaching that is student-led, where we as student tutors, we set a challenge and the students choose a path towards a designed solution. So as a response to that challenge. Studio is also the place where the collaboration between SDU and GXN took place. This is the Studio 1 on circular built environment. And this is where we introduce circularity as the starting points for students that are learning about the built environment. So why do we do that? Well, if we take a step back, we can see that the world population is growing and that people keep moving to cities, as is illustrated in this dramatic image of Mexico City. So the world's urban population is on its way to reach about 6.7 billion people in 2050. Yeah, so that's 6.7 billion people living in cities. That is about 2.5 billion more than people that live in cities today. So we have to double the amount of floor space available on the planet in the next 30 to 40 years. And this is, of course, a huge thing and has a huge impact. It will change the face of our planet. It will stretch the limit of the planetary systems. And of course, it will stretch the limits of the social and urban systems as well. So I would say this is quite a challenge for a new generation of building engineers. And when we analyze the problem, there appear to be some areas where building designers can make a difference. And we can break this down into materials, waste, and CO2. And at the same time, we have to consider that we should not just focus on new buildings, but that we have a huge existing building stock to deal with as well. If we start with the first point, materials, we can start to see that the impact that we have on our planet, that we start to see the impact that we have on our planet just by extracting raw materials. The scale of the impact is so significant even that some people say that we have entered a new geological time, which we could call the Anthropocene. It is not the natural forces of the planet anymore that dominate the shaping of the Earth, but it is us, humans. And we can see the effect by looking at some of the mining operations that take place in the world. This is brown coal, for example, that is being mined in the image that you see here. And here we see the deepest open copper mine in the world, which is in Chile. Just to get a sense of scale, just try to look at the bottom of the pit where you can see some massive vehicles driving around. This is a graph produced every month by a Brazilian NGO that maps the deforestation of the Amazon rainforest. A huge impact. But we can also just look closer at home. This is an image of Denmark, of a sand pit, where by 2050 it's expected that in Denmark that there won't be access to gravel and sand. So gravel and sand are key ingredients for mortar and for concrete, which is the most widely used material in construction. And in fact, the built environment is responsible for somewhere between 1/3 and 50% of all extracted materials. So the second one is waste. And in terms that the EU uses, in the EU terms, we talk about construction and demolition waste. So construction waste is basically everything related to the beginnings of buildings, which would be packaging of building materials, residual materials, dealing with mistakes on building sites. And a lot of this is due to the complex logistics of building sites. So it's not an easy problem to solve. The largest part of the waste is due to demolition, which either takes place due to renovations or at the end of a building's life. And due to traditional building practices, it might be difficult to separate building waste into the original materials or even into the original building components. And again, if we look at the numbers, we can see that in Europe, 37% of all waste is construction and demolition waste. So the third point is CO2, and there are two parts here. There is CO2 that's related to energy that's required to run a building, and there is CO2 related to the energy that goes into the production of the materials and the components that make a building. So we may call this embodied energy. So the energy to run a building, for example, for heating and cooling, used to be the major part. But because our buildings get more and more efficient, increasingly we see that the so-called embodied energy is now mostly responsible for the carbon footprint of a building. What you see in this image is a kiln. It's sort of an oven of 200 meters long that rotates slowly with a big torch that blasts heat into one side of the cylinder. The temperature inside is about 1450 degrees Celsius. So these things are used to make cement, which is another key ingredient for concrete. And on its own, the cement industry is said to be responsible for about 5% of all man-made CO2 emissions. So in terms of overall emissions, the built environment is responsible for about 30 to 40%, where about half is embodied and half is operational energy. But as we see that buildings become more and more efficient, the embodied part of the energy is becoming the key issue. So in overview, the built environment is responsible for about 35 to 50% of materials, 37% of all waste, and 30 to 40% of the CO2 emissions. And because it's easier to remember, we have referred to this as the rule of thirds. Built environment is responsible for 1/3 of all materials, 1/3 of all waste, and 1/3 of all energy. But as we've seen, that may be a bit of an understatement. Okay, so now it's over to Cor.
Thank you, Hugo, and thank you, Mika, for this invitation. I mean, it's incredibly exciting to be able to present this work for you guys here. Thank you, Hugo, also for being invited to participate in this studio. It's always fun to engage with students, and especially first-year students. I mean, the bad news, Hugo has just laid out for you, this rule of third. That news is that the built environment is very much part of the problem. I mean, the good news is that with numbers like these, we also have to be part of the solution. And I really think that must be one of the most exciting reasons to start studying architecture or design at the moment. But we're not normally based in an academic research environment. My name is Cor Poulsgaard. I'm from GXN Innovation. We are an architecture and research company based in Copenhagen. If Hugo flips to the next page, you can see office. So we're basically two companies under one roof. We've got a traditional architecture company, that's 3XN. And then we got the research company, GXN, which is where I work. And that means we can cover everything from sort of competition wins and project development through to research into materials, technologies, and so on. If you go ahead, Hugo. And we really work across scales. I mean, we have an office that we can work across things from master plans all the way down to individual product design, including some of the research that needs to go into this along the way. So that sort of link between research and practice is, I think, what's interesting about this constellation between 3XN Architects and GXN Innovation. And one way of looking at it is if we look into the business models of each company or the work practices that we're doing. So if we look at 3XN, which will be on the next slide, we can see that in a normal architectural research, in a normal architectural project, we've got a situation with large budgets, long time frames, and a lot of moving parts. So in that environment, risks scale quickly, and a large part of what architects do is really getting from A to B, or trying to get from A to B, from concept to finished building, with as few hiccups along the way as possible. So, from render to finished building on time and on budget. Thank you very much. Of course, you can do a lot of research and innovation within a process like this, but there's certain things you don't get to do, which is kind of what we get to do in GXN. You don't get to ask too many open-ended questions. You don't get to test out untested materials. You don't get to make too many mistakes because mistakes are costly. What we get to do in GXN is ask these open-ended questions, test out new things, and make mistakes and learn from our mistakes. So GXN is set into the world to be a research and innovation company. That means that we don't necessarily know where we're going to end up. We might have an idea, but we will usually start from an idea or a research question. And we work collaboratively with research funding from different partners, which means that we can sort of de-risk the process of then exploring what that concept or idea means. And our output is often not a building, but will be different things. For example, we have made new materials made from upcycled agricultural waste. We have looked into robotic fabrications and workflows for that. We've done behavior strategies for how to improve buildings for people. And we put out a lot of books. So all the knowledge we generate in 3XN, we put out as open source knowledge. We work across these three fields, behavior design, digital design, and circular design. Increasingly, we're seeing these fields being mixed. So that we, for example, look at relationships between circular design and digital design in material passports. But if we just look into the circular design problem, which is what we're talking about today, again, we cover quite a few things, anything from actual buildings. So what you can see there under the name of low carbon design is a new hotel. It's an old timber hotel that we built in the island of Bornholm. We also do strategic collaborations with the likes of Arup, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, professorships, publications, government advisory. And we have a specific project which we talk to the students about in order for them to train circular economy. And that's the project I want to just explain here, what we're talking about when we talk about circular economy. So this project is the Circle House. Here you see the demonstrator, and I'll explain what that is in a second, but if you move on. Hugo, please. Maybe there's a bit of a lag. So the Circle House project is a research project that really came out. It's a research and development project that came out of a book we wrote that's called Building a Circular Future. In that book, we looked at what it requires to actually go ahead and to do circular economy, design circular buildings, construct circular buildings, and maintain circular buildings so that we can reuse the materials at the end of their life. And that's the idea with the circular economy. In a linear economy, the business as usual scenario that Hugo just told you all about so eloquently, we take resources out of the ground, we work them into products, we put the products into our buildings, and then once we're done with the buildings, we tear them down and we throw away the resources. In a circular economy, we want to make sure that we can keep the resources circulating at as high a value as possible for as long as possible. And this project was really looking into that with the aim of constructing specific circular housing elements. It's supported by the Danish EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency in Dania, to really bring together the industry and think about how to design circular housing. And so we brought pretty much everybody together looking. Please go ahead, Hugo. So this is part of the startup workshops. As you can see, this is a large sort of section of the built environment in Denmark. We had everybody from the building construction client, which is a housing association here in Denmark, through to engineers, architects, product suppliers, researchers. Everybody has a piece of the puzzle, and we wanted to get everybody around the table to put the puzzle together, all of us. So one thing that we specifically looked into for this project was how to design these circular housing units. We're doing it for a social housing corporation here in Denmark. And in order to make sure that we shared the knowledge widely in the industry, we created this communal design studio, sort of inspired by some 60s workshops here in Denmark, with GXN, 3XN Architects, and 2 other Danish companies called Lena and Vandkunsten. So this communal design studio designed the housing units. There's 60 units all in all. 4 different housing typologies to really show the diversity of what we can do when we want to do circular economy or circular design. All these units are designed to be fully circular, and for this specific project, what we define that is that we can take 90% of all the materials and products that go into them and reuse them at the end of their building life with no significant loss of value. So a large part of that is figuring out how we design for disassembly, how we design so that we can take things apart again, and how we then maintain things. And one of the key things for this, and one of the key things that are interesting to talk to new engineering students, is of course the superstructure. So for this specific project, we're looking into a superstructure that's based in concrete. It's one of the most popular building materials still in Denmark, prefab concrete elements. We're looking at ways of introducing reversible connections into the superstructure, and then looking at ways of working with these reversible connections so that we can actually take them apart again, for example, using lime mortar. And I can show that some of this in a second. So if you look at the elements at first, we researched with the industry. This is a Danish element producer called Svendpom. We went to their factories and had a look at how you're creating these precast concrete elements. And if you go to the next slide, one of the interesting learnings from here was just how much variation you can actually get into precast concrete elements. They've got a very sort of sophisticated setup, or very quick setup anyway, where they can quickly change these elements. What we wanted to do for this project, though, was create a simplified system of very few elements. And working with the engineers and the architects, we came down with just basically 6 elements, which you can see on the next slide. 3 overall components broken down into 6 different elements: 2 wall elements, 2 slabs, and 2 beams. And out of that, we can can build all the 60 housing units. So that's sort of the simplified building system. We are then looking at the connections and the fittings. I mean, one of the key things is that we can take things apart again. When we're working with these prefab elements, it is almost like building a large-scale Lego house. You put them in, but then basically we end up in a situation, as you can see on the next slide, where we come to the part where everything is put together, and in comes a cement mixer and pours cement into all these connections. and what was reversible becomes fused together in ways so we can't take it apart. And so we really wanted to see if we could create a reversible superstructure. We looked at all the different connections in buildings. You can see that on the next slide in the superstructure, and tried to think about how we might do reversible fittings. Through this research, we got in touch with a Finnish company called Paiko. Paiko, as you can see on the next couple of slides, have developed a series of sort of mechanical locks that you can utilize to create, to fuse concrete elements together, which is more or less almost circular, but not all the way there. One of the key elements of their locks is this sort of what they call the Sumo Shoe. It's the shoe which you can see on the next page, which allows for mechanical sort of connections between elements. But then, as you might see on this, which maybe is a little bit tricky to get, but you have the different elements sort of on each side of that box in the middle. That box in the middle is hollow, and this is where you can tighten the screws and bolts that holds everything together. In order to ensure that there's fire safety, these boxes are then normally covered over with cement to basically fuse everything together. And cement we can't get out, and therefore we can't really reverse the setting. So what we tried to do here was work with a Danish company that does lime mortar, see if we could utilize lime mortar to get the same qualities, but then actually be able to wash it out, which is what you're going to be seeing in the next slide. Yeah, well, so as you can see, it's actually fairly easy to get this out. It's sorry for the video quality, it's a little bit jumpy, but we did a couple of tests like these. Please jump to the next slide. And all of these washed out quite nicely. Now we have access to the bolts, so we can actually take the elements apart again. So this was sort of a small-scale prototype. In order to convince the industry that this was a possibility, we also did a full-scale demonstrator unit. This is built in front of the Housing Association here in Copenhagen in Denmark. And during that construction, we learned a lot of things. And these are some of the things we could then share with the students. So, for example, we looked with the students at the system itself. If you can just flick through the next couple of slides. This is sort of how it is. We have these bottom, we have the beams, foundations, then comes the floor slabs, in come the walls on top of that. You add then the next floor slabs, or the beam, and then the next floor slabs. And this is, of course, not exactly how fast it was, but it was actually very fast. And we managed to build this 10% faster than we expected because of the mechanical fittings and the simplified system, which sort of points to the savings that we can actually have with the circular economy. We could then share the details with the students, but there's some interesting ones. For example, this is a detail from the engineer showing how the individual floor slabs are held together with a steel plate in the middle. We can look at the next slide. We can sort of see how that works from the top. And with that steel plate and the way we're looking at the way the beams work, we were then able to actually also create soft spots in the building. If you go to the next one, where you can imagine that some of these floor slabs can actually be lifted out. So if we have a building that's stacked with several floors on top of each other, we could create openings to, in the future, for example, change a unit from being just one floor to maybe being 2 floors by putting in stairs. So one thing is the reversibility of the structure itself. Another thing is the adaptability for it to maintain its life over time. And these are some of the things we could then talk with the students about, what does it mean to make these mechanical fittings? What opportunities does it give us? What does that mean for layout? Where can we have a soft spot? Is it possible to have it anywhere in the building, or do we have to think about services and so on? So a lot of interesting discussions there. If we move on, we can see these are some of the fittings for where you can see how the wall elements are being put in place. I think you kind of get the picture of what it is we're trying to do. Again, some technical drawings for how this works. This is an interesting one. We're experimenting with a lot of different solutions. This is a very sort of lo-fi material passport. It's a QR code that we can cast into the individual elements, and if you scan that, you'll get information about the elements and the number of elements in the total building. So traceability, of course, becomes important for the circular economy. If somebody takes this building apart in 60 years and want to reuse the elements, we got to have a paper trail, or in this case, a data trail on what these elements are and how they've been utilized. And we also looked, as you can see in the next couple of slides, at different sort of solutions. This is the facade, for example, where you can see we are utilizing a stone cladding from a Danish company called Komproment, which is set up on these reversible frames so you can easily fix them out. We also tested out on the same frame utilizing these burned wood shingles. which are taken and upcycled from the Danish metro building. We had these plastic shingles on the other wall. These shingles are used. This is already the second time they're being used. They've been put up in a building in the Netherlands before. And then we looked at different solutions in the interior and really used this demonstrator to showcase all the sort of circular solutions that are already on the market, ways of doing partitions that are reversible, upcycled furniture, and so on. And the point about the demonstrator was, of course, to show that this was possible, but also to make it safe for consortia to actually bid on this project once it was put out to tender. It is a social housing project. It has to be able to compete on market terms. And we just had the tender out and just successfully completed the tender. And this is now being built over the next 2 to 3 years in Aarhus. I think that's it for the Circle House project.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that bit. And this was, of course, I think an amazing backdrop for students to see what this idea of circular building means in real life in industry, and to understand some of the complications that are involved in doing some of these things. We have a couple minutes left, I think, so we can talk a little bit about some of the student work and some of the output that the students have delivered, just to see what topics they engaged with. One group set out, for example, to design a summer house that people can rent during the holidays, and the house would then educate people, make them aware and perhaps a little bit less afraid to live in a circular house. So it's really about education. That building also incorporated the principle of design for disassembly. So not only would this building be sort of fairly simple and quick to assemble on site, but it would also be able to be taken apart in the separate elements with an idea to perhaps reuse those elements in another setting. Another group looked at repurposing some old storage silos on a beautiful spot along one of the Danish fjords, and they were looking at using timber as a main new structural material, because we're starting to understand the impact that concrete has on the environment. So maybe we can look at using different materials. One group considered new ways of living together and in a building that would then also nudge inhabitants to make their behavior more sustainable. Yeah, so this is the idea that a building, that the physical environment can actually encourage people to behave in certain ways, to nudge them into certain behavior. Other groups developed concepts for modular houses that would grow and shrink with the needs of families. Yeah, as families grow, they may need more space, so you could easily add units to the building. And when that space is maybe not needed anymore, these units can be taken away again. Or they developed flexible solutions so that space can be used in different ways. Some students also looked at related topics. So this one is on biodiversity, and they looked at how green roofs can make a difference in bringing back species of flowers and insects into urbanized areas. The last image I have today is on material flows and value change, and for a modular family home, this group looked into the whole flow of materials, starting from extraction to prefabrication of units, to transport, and then to assembly of these units on site. So I hope that this has given you a bit of insight in the different ways that we as building designers can make a change.
Thank you, Hugo, and thank you, Kor. It was a very insightful presentation that shows that architects and engineers have to work with the industry actually to change the industry, especially the principles of building that are still quite old-fashioned, I think. And also that we have to think about the materiality and what kind of materials we architects put into buildings much more. Do you think there's a chance of finding an alternative to concrete in the nearest future? It's a bit flat question, I know, but I think it's something that that any builder or architect would ask.
Yeah, I think if I can go first, maybe Cor can say something as well. I think it's, to be honest, I think it's very difficult, and I think there may be ways around it. So if we can, I mean, the production of concrete is very intense in terms of raw materials, in terms of energy, of course. But if we can make use of the material much longer and in a much more flexible way, we can of course benefit. And ways of doing that, of course, are making sure that elements are modular, that they could be reapplied after they're taken apart, that we monitor what's happening during their lifetimes, that we have a paper trail or a material passport, as Cor mentioned, so that we actually know what the elements are when we take a building apart. Those would be huge improvements over just destructing concrete and losing its value. What would you say, Cor?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, it's an interesting fact. In Denmark, I believe we say that we reuse 98% of all our concrete, which is certainly true. I mean, in the sense that what we do is we take these concrete elements, we crush them down with the buildings, and then we utilize them as road fill. But basically, the value of road fill versus the value of new concrete element, if you look at it per weight, is about 2% of the original product. And of course, you got to make new concrete elements if you want to build new. So finding ways of utilizing resources for longer, I think is important. I think it's going to be very tricky to not be building with concrete. Of course, I think we got to be doing both. We got to be looking for alternatives and smart alternatives and ways of building with, utilizing TGBS, for example, in concrete and having a higher proportion of that wherever we can. So I think there's not going to be a silver bullet. There's not going to be one thing. I think we got to be doing more things along each other, in the same sort of line, and then figuring out along the way how to best optimize as we go.
Okay, great. Thank you so very much for your answers. And I'm sure if there are questions afterwards, I will forward them to you. And thank you so much for being a part of our event.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Naša naslednja gostja pa je Špela Štern, arhitektka v podjetju Eleja IC. Povedala nam bo, kako je šlo njihovo podjetje tekom leta 2020 skozi trajnostno transformacijo, ki je potekala tako v ustroju delovanja podjetja, kot tudi v samih projektih, ki jih načrtujejo. Špela, prosim.
Lepo pozdravljeni. Pozdravljamo tematiko današnje razprave. Pozdravljamo vse pozitivne reference, ki smo jih videli danes na predhodnih prezentacijah. Pozdravljamo nove inovacije, alternative materialov oziroma rabe le-teh. In hvala MAO, Centru za kreativnost, Partnerstvu za trajno gospodarstvo, da z vami podelimo naše videnje oziroma naš razmislek na temo, kakšne inovacije, kakšne reforme so potrebne, v našem primeru transformacije našega DNK-ja, kako delamo in kaj delamo bolj trajnostno, vzdržnejše. Torej, moje ime je Špela Štern, znotraj podjetja Eleja IC vodim oddelek za arhitekturo. Eleja IC je na topografiji regionalni in širše prisotna z letošnjim letom že 30 let in zreli smo za razmislek, kako interdisciplinarnost, ki je neka osnovna tema našega podjetja, nadgraditi v smislu trajnosti. Obvladujemo področje arhitekture, gradbenih konstrukcij, nizkih gradenj, inženirskih konstrukcij, torej premostitvenih objektov, predorov, geotehnike, geologije, komunalne infrastrukture, projektnega vodenja in nadzora tekom gradbišč. Že sama narava teh področji pove o velikem impaktu, torej vplivu naše, torej realizirane produkcije po projektih, ki jih imamo na mizi, v okolje v vseh aspektih. Vsekakor se razumemo kot idealno agar območje za inovacije, predvsem vsled konstantnemu kontaktu različnih disciplin, različnih strok. Znotraj LEIC v Ljubljani nas je 116 strokovnjakov, funkcioniramo pa v družini IC z kompatibilnimi vedami oziroma sorodnimi in štejemo v kompletu družino 600 članskih strokovnjakov. Torej trajnost, tema in beseda, katero imamo kar pogosto v debatah. Kaj to natančno pomeni? Tako v preteklem letu smo se podali na pot nekega presejalnega programa, kako to razumemo, kje jo vidimo in kako jo lahko implementiramo skozi svoje delo. Vključili smo se v projekt Spirita, trajnostna poslovna strateška transformacija. Se pomrežili z raznovrstnimi podjetji in sami kot storitveno podjetje kar temeljito zagrizali v pojme vpliva na okolje, vpliva na ekonomsko vzdržnost, to pomeni, kako provocirati nove povezovanja, kako vplivati na kulturo, sociološki aspekt, poleg seveda grajenega, kjer pa smo lahko najbolj prisotni. Vsekakor obdobje dela je v letu 2020 je zajemalo kar 8-mesečno obdobje. 8-mesečno obdobje paralelno z tekočo produkcijo projektov, gradbišč in podobnega, ki smo jih imeli odprtih. Kot pri vsakem projektu smo se tudi tukaj najprej zazrli vase. Torej na pogled navznoter, kako se trajnost skozi našo funkcioniranje in skozi eleate lahko kreira, vzpodbudi, kako se razume, s fokusom na delovno okolje, kje smo. Z koronskim delovnim okoljem v preteklem letu smo bili dejansko presenečeni nad tekočo in učinkovito produkcijo. Zamislili smo se v pogled vase, kakšno kulturo imamo, kakšno kulturo želimo gojiti, medosebnih odnosov in sporočanj skozi projekte. Bistvo je zadovoljstvo zaposlenih oziroma zbliževanje svojih vidikov in vizij, prevetritev metod dela in nadgradnja kompetenc zaposlenih in seveda optimizacija projektnega vodenja. Domača naloga navznoter nas pripelje do pogleda navzven, kjer je nagrajeno okolje skozi našo projektivo največ vpliva, kjer lahko s sinergijo strok ustvarimo mogoče kakšne preskoke, sinergijo, tudi napake, ki bi pripeljale do inovacij na tem področju, uspešno komuniciranje z naročniki, spodbujanje le-teh k prepoznavanju trajnostnih aspektov njihove nameravane gradnje. Želimo vedno ostajati odprtih oči, glav in ušes do strokovne in laične javnosti, nadgraditi učinkovitejšo komunikacijo, vse v smeri seveda javnega dobra za nas in za bodoče rodove. Ponovno, vse skupaj je dokaj intenziven proces, ampak domača naloga, ki se včasih majčkeno zapraši, ampak mislim, da za vsako podjetje je dobro, da poleg tekoče produkcije vzpostavi tudi novo vizijo za trajnostno prihodnost. Introspekcija zadovoljstva zaposlenih nas je kar presenetila, dejansko eleati so zelo vedoželjni, željni novih znanj in skozi to vajo v preteklem letu smo vzpostavili kar nekaj nadgradenj kompetenc, to pomeni nadgradili znanja iz komplementarnih disciplin. To pomeni nekih par kazalnikov before in after, ob začetku in ob koncu projekta. Dejansko pa na področju interdisciplinarnih projektantov, ki sedijo skupaj in je sistematična izobraževanje kar dokaj pomembna tema. To pomeni parčkanje izkušenejših projektantov z projektanti, ki pridejo glih iz univerz, potem dejansko povabila vabljenim predavateljem na temo dnevnih osvetlitev, na temo pravilnega inkorporacije ogrevalnih sistemov, obnovljivih virov energije. Vzpostavili smo Eleatsko akademijo z predavanji minimalno na 2 do 3 tedne, kjer se projektante dejansko nadgrajuje z komplementarnimi znanji, tako na regionalnem nivoju kot svetovnem, da se stroki sledi. Kar pa nam je se zdelo dokaj pomembno, da se paradigma, kako gledamo na naše projekte, postavi iz drugega abecedarja, tudi kako jih vrednotimo. Parameter za vrednost projekta ni samo neka kvadratura, program, kompleksnost, ampak predvsem trajnostni parametri, katere smo ali nismo uspešno inkorporirali, katere želimo promovirati skozi svoje projekte. Mogoče, če se ustavim več na tem slajdu, kontekst grajenega okolja, torej z napredkom tehnologije, z vsemi softverji, ki so nam na uporabo, zelo skrbno, predvsem na vidikih infrastrukturnih umeščanj, posegov v prostor, umeščamo in modificiramo, kaj je za okolje najbolj primerno. Enako pri obdelavi obstoječega stavbnega fonda, grajenega fonda, to pomeni rekonstrukcija kot ena dokaj blizu ultimativni gradnji za prihodnost, kako recikliramo grajeni fond. Zatem seveda poudarek na materialih, seveda dokler, da ne dočakamo še bistvene alternative betonu, kar je predvsem pri infrastrukturnih projektih dokaj pomemben parameter trajnosti, vzdržnosti in ustreznih tehničnih specifikacij. Lahko skrbno izbiro gradnikov promoviramo trajnejšo gradnjo. Dejansko lahko tudi zmanjšamo odpadke. Kar pa se tiče oskrbe z energijo, višja energetska učinkovitost, integriranost sistemov, prezračevanja, ogrevanja skupaj z promocijo obnovljivih virov energije, je pot, kateri naj bi sledili. Zniževanje onesnaževanja na naših mizah je ogromno kompleksnejših projektov, ki pridobivajo dovoljenje tudi skozi integralne postopke. To pomeni, da se vključuje še podstrokovnjake za posamezna področja, kot na primer emisije svetlobe, hrupa, okolja, prezračevanja. Za samo mobilnost seveda poudarek na promoviranju javnega transporta, kolesarskega prometa, elektropolnilnic. Družba in gospodarstvo in vplivi našega dejavnosti na leto nikakor ne sme zapostavljati inkorporacijo, to pomeni dostopnost za vse, vključno z morebitnimi pomanjkljivostmi. Tehnologija pa s projektivo dejansko gremo korak s korakom z BIM tehnologijo, ki mogoče podaljša ali pa postane bolj kompleksnejša faza projektiranja in usklajevanja, medtem ko sama gradnja se pri tem skrajša. Investicija je bolj kontrolirana. Poglavitna 4 področja, obnovljivi viri energije, dejansko skozi projekte se soočamo z veliko katerimi vzpodbudami na tem področju, na vidiku sofinanciranja, možnosti pridobivanja sredstev in podobno, a na drugi strani z izzivi, predvsem kako to zrealizirati, časovni roki tovrstnih gradenj se podaljšajo, začetne investicije se podaljšajo, medtem ko na daljši rok je v povratnih dobah ekonomsko učinkovita alternativa. Govorimo o gradnji toplotnih črpalk, voda, sončnih elektrarnah, tudi uporabi biomase. Želimo pa si še več izzivov na vidiku izrabe obnovljivih virov energije na področju vetra, plimovanja in podobno. Škodljivi izpusti, kot sem že omenila, predvsem pri zahtevnejših objektih z vplivi na okolje. Seveda, tukaj je definitivno v projektivo vključenih več deležnikov, je kompleksnejše, ampak za samo okolje sprejemljivejše. Za samo energetsko učinkovitost je torej ključno dobro sodelovanje z svojimi strokovnjaki iz IC skupine oziroma tudi lokalnimi na področju strojnih elektroinštalacij in energetske učinkovitosti, kjer z integracijo rešitev in že vpeljavo v zgodnjih konceptualnih fazah lahko pripeljemo projekt do zelo visoke energetske učinkovitosti. Posledično ogljična nevtralnost. Na mizah imamo veliko projektov rekonstrukcij, ker je tudi narava Eleje od štarta podjetje se je začelo z področjem gradbenih konstrukcij in tukaj so rekonstrukcije obstoječega fonda, nek železni repertoar. Upamo, da tudi tako ostane in da bomo vedno bolj inovativni na tem področju. Mogoče se zdaj predstavljamo iz same zgodbe preteklega leta in introspekcije v par grajenih oziroma načrtovanih gradenj, eden od teh kopališče Ilirija. To pomeni vrednotenje vseh nas in želimo, da tudi javnosti pomeni z našim abecedarjem. To pomeni, kje, na katerih trajnostnih vidikih projekt prednjači, kaj promovira in čemu sledi. Projekt, ki je dokaj težko, skoraj nič energetsko stavba, gre za večji, zaprt plavalni kompleks olimpijskih dimenzij z športnim objektom, kombinacija z rekonstrukcijo obstoječe stavbne dediščine in zunanjim športnim igriščem. Dejansko se približuje za svojimi specifikacijami skoraj samozadostni hiši. Dejansko za sam projekt smo predvideli sistem ogrevanja preko toplotnih črpalk voda. Moram reči, da smo z uspešno zastavljenim konceptom in promocijo pri naročniku uspeli pridobiti nekako soglasje k tovrstnemu energetskemu konceptu. Pri tem in mogoče še pri kakšni občini po Sloveniji tukaj velikokrat pristanemo na mogoče malo crash z regulativo, torej odloki, katere ima občina sprejete glede prioritetne rabe energije. Nekje ni v prid obnovljivih virov energije, ampak z vztrajnostjo se doseže tudi trajnost. Vodnjaki so za kopališča Ilirija že zgrajeni, je pa res, da tak postopek podaljša recimo pridobivanje gradbenega dovoljenja kar za kako leto. Dejansko tukaj vidimo tudi na nivoju države kar nekaj izzivov, kako tekoče vpeljati tovrstne trajnostne prakse investitorjem, prikazati, da to je finančno vzdržno na daljši rok seveda in za okolje, družbo. To pomeni kot projektant in nekak umestnik med naročniki, uporabniki, regulativo in podobno. Tukaj je kar pomembno, da se projektanti vztrajamo, da pregrizemo skozi vse te ovire, ki nas trenutno še pestijo, da pridemo do res trajnih uspešnih rešitev. Mogoče še eden izmed večjih, katere smo v teh 30 letih obdelovali, to je drugi tir Divača Koper, kjer je iz našega vidika zelo uspešno se zrealiziralo sodelovanje enih večjega konzorcija slovenskih lokalnih podjetij, ki je spromovirala in umestila v naravno ciljno okolje to vrsten poseg, seveda. Dejansko je krajina tlele ranljiva, poseg za svojo umestitvijo proba to zminimizirati. Daljšeročne koristi, kot je razbremenitev, infrastrukturnih cestnih koridorjev pa je tukaj neoporečna, enako kot ekonomska učinkovitost tovrstnega projekta za Slovenijo. Drugi tir je eden izmed projektov bil pri nas, katerega bi težko kontrolirali oziroma obvladali brez uporabe tehnologije, BIM tehnologije, samega postopka, projektive. Interdisciplinarnost vseh vplivov, nekako menedžeriranje investicijske vrednosti in optimizacij, to pomeni, kar lahko naredimo, je optimizirati elemente, dimenzije in razpone, da se porabi materijala čim manj, da se narava in situ ohranja čim več. Dejansko, kar nas še žalosti, so pogodbene obveze o hard copies. Tale hard copy bi lahko pokril površino 2 nogometnih igrišč. Dejansko pa je, kar je pomembno še znotraj leje, da se digitalni razvoj z roko v roki s trajnostnim poveže tudi v certificiranih objektih. Vedno več naročnikov, investitorjev, posebej, če gre za večje multikorporacije, se odloča za certificiranje. LEED in BREEAM so že cikli, kateri so za nami. Moramo reči, da veliko stopenj od certificiranja naša regulativa že zagotavlja. Medtem ko dodatni koraki so pa tisti, ki bi predvsem, ne vem, projektantom in naročnikom, ki se s tem takoj želijo soočiti, potrebno določiti v projektni nalogi čim prej. Že samo faza pridobivanja gradbišča, priprave terena, razpisov je pomembna pri vključevanju v kontekst. LEED certifikat, prvi v Sloveniji, je bil podeljen našemu projektu Lidl, Arja vas. Pri BREEAMu pa smo imeli izkušnjo na IKEA v Ljubljani. IKEA je dobila tudi prvi BREEAM Excellent v Sloveniji z svojo ustrezno umestitvijo in izrabe sončne energije, enako voda, z v bistvu tudi ponovno uporabo inštalacijskih sistemov in prometno umestitvijo v okolje. To pomeni, zavedamo se bremena, zavedamo se odgovornosti do okolja, katerega snujemo. Z veseljem se lotevamo rekonstrukcij, kot na primer projekt Cukrarne, avtorjev arhitekture Scape Laba. Z parametriziranjem odločitev podpiramo naročnika, da pride do optimalne rešitve. Prihajamo do optimizacije rabe materialov, zmanjšanja odpadkov, optimizacije vplivov, do nenazadnje na regionalnem oziroma večjem skelu umeščanja posegov v sam prostor. Tukaj gre za infrastrukturo, medtem ko tudi za visoko gradnjo so ta digitalna orodja v bistvu naj bodo kar pripomoček za everyday. To pomeni, topografija iz prvega slajda se spreminja v nek tak prstni odtis eleje, čemur se bomo prizadevali, da bomo v prihodnosti seveda čim bolj sprejemljivi. Hvala vam.
Hvala, Špela. Ali se ti zdi, kot arhitektki v enem takem inženirskem podjetju v bistvu, ali pa ne, ker delaš v interdisciplinarnem timu, se ti zdi, da smo tako arhitekti v Sloveniji še vedno zadržani proti nekim tem trajnostnim principom gradnje?
Bi lahko rekla, ker mogoče iz nekega strahu, neke fame, kaj to je v bistvu DNK, katerega moramo čutiti vsi. In v bistvu za nas, arhitekte, ki ponavadi običajno imamo radi neke omejitvene elemente, ker tam smo lahko najbolj kreativni. Mislim, da je tudi to bi mogla biti dobra popotnica za vse nadobudne, vedoželjne in inovativne arhitekte.
Ampak se ti zdi, da ta trajnostni aspekt, ali pa če ga pač poskušaš čim večji meri inkorporirati v nek objekt, da to podraži samo gradnjo, to je po mojem... Ja.
Da.
Drug je pa podaljša pač postopke, verjetno.
Da.
Kaj bi lahko naredili, da temu ne bi bilo tako in kaj ti vidiš kot neko tako perspektivo za arhitekturo? Kaj bi morali arhitekti narediti, da bi v bistvu da bi imeli grajeno okolje manjši impact?
Jaz mislim, da prav glede teh bistvenih, torej rabe virov, torej človeških, vemo, kaj narediti, doma imamo veliko za narediti, vsako podjetje, ampak glede obnovljivih virov energije mislim, da moramo proaktivno pristopiti k temu, poiskati rešitve, kaj lahko zadevo spravi v hitrejši tek. Paralelna raziskava na terenih, medtem ko se z naročnikom že pogovarjamo o naslednjih fazah in podobno. Takoj, ko zamudimo mogoče z samim konceptom že par mesecev, je že veliko zamujenega. Jaz mislim, da bi mogli biti mi neki promotorji tudi napram naročnikom, uporabnikom, družbi širši, laični in strokovni, zato da dosežemo trajnostno okolje.
Ok, to pomeni, da bomo vztrajali.
Bomo vztrajali, da bomo trajali.
Ja, in vztrajali bomo tudi z dogodki, kot je ta današnji. Hvala, ker ste bili z nami in se vidimo na naslednjem prenosu veščin. Spremljate nas. Čau.